Good afternoon. Thank you very much for showing up for what proves to be an exercise in showing you how the sausage is made. I appreciate everyone taking the time. First off, I'd just like to acknowledge the fact we're holding this meeting on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly our neighbors in the Qualicum Nation. And with that, adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? With that, the agenda is adopted by consent. And Ms. Varela, as some folks might realize, I'm not Tunis Westbrook. And Ms. Varela, if you just want to pass on some of the words from the mayor.
Thank you, Chair. The mayor wanted the public to know that he is at home recovering from a medical condition, and we anticipate him being back in fine form by November 20th. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Varela. And with that, the first item then would be correspondence from KSS. Would that be a member of council or a member of staff speaking to that?
I can speak to that. So the resolution and recommendation, the background information is on page 3, and this is from Ray Warniak from the KSS Biosphere Awareness Day Initiative. And there's an invitation to host a table for town council to do that. So the resolution is that, staff recommendation is that council hosts a table on behalf of the town council at the first annual Biodiversity Awareness Day Community Connections event, December 4th, and further that the table be attended by Councillor X and Councillor X, so 2 members of council.
I spoke to Ray a moment ago. I'm sure other members of council might have reached out to him as well. Sounds like a wonderful initiative. Is there any recommendations for who the councillors ought to be? Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I'm happy to volunteer that day and be present. And if there's 3 of us, maybe we could spell each other off or whatever works, but maybe we could add 3 and work within that, because I understand Councillor Young has other commitments and isn't able to attend, but I'm willing to put my name forward.
And Councillor Vandervalk.
And I would be happy to put my name forward as well.
And myself as well. We did a very good job handling out juice boxes, so I'm sure we could do an equally good job dealing with this. So I do appreciate, too, Councillor Skipsey's suggestion. The other thing, too, is that if we're just clear that we can't advance any new business, we can still attend. So that's just a discussion we can have between the 3 of us. But this is a wonderful event, and it's great to see council participation. And I spoke to Ray, our MP and MLA will be attending as well. So it's good to have the town attend, and I don't want to presume where the mayor will be, but I'm sure he would be welcome to say a few words. With that, then would someone like to move that? Councillor Skipsey, seconded by Councillor Vandervalk. All those in favor? Unanimous approval. Thank you very much. And now we have the fun of the OCP. So with that, I believe it'd be Mr. Sales taking point on this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I do have a presentation. And so as council is aware, we have been in the process of updating the town's official community plan for the better part of the year. We have done extensive community consultation in a compressed period of time and received council direction on a number of key decision points. So having worked on an updated draft of the official community plan over the summer and earlier this fall, we are now at the point where we're introducing it. So I have a detailed presentation that goes over the structure of the OCP and also addresses how each of the individual decision points were incorporated into the new draft plan. Just to recap, the process began early this year with the Quality of Life Survey. We then transitioned into in-person community engagement, which was compressed into a period of time of approximately 2 months, during which we had 31 community meetings. Then we transitioned to actually drafting the OCP, and here we are at the first consideration of the draft for council discussion. Well, just to summarize quickly, I already said we had a lot of community engagement events, and it was in a compressed period of time, but that detailed list is in the council package if you'd like to read it. The community discussion focused on a few key decision points. The first decision point was, who should we be focusing on in terms of housing? What are the groups that are most in need, and what are their particular needs? We discussed where that housing should be located in the community, There are existing development patterns in the official community plan, and council also considered some opportunities to expand those areas where development could be considered. We discussed what that housing should look like in terms of both the unit type and also form and character. And lastly, we discussed the ways that the town could be involved in the development process beyond the obvious role as a regulator. So this is an important slide because I think it's important to recognize a few factors. One is that because of the compressed period of time that was required because of provincial legislation, the town couldn't do a fulsome, all-encompassing review of the OCP. So some of the top topics that are in the OCP weren't on the table for community engagement. And that drives one of the key considerations in this OCP update, in that if we didn't have an opportunity to consult with the public, we tried not to change the content. So in other words, when council or the public are reading this document, there will be policies in some of the sections that are not related to housing, maybe environmental development permit areas, or could be community safety, or whatever that might be. You might read some of those and think, well, these should be discussed. They're a little bit out of date. That can very well be the case. But in order to maintain that promise to the public that this OCP review was on the topic of housing, we took a very light touch to anything that wasn't housing related. So if it was very wrong and clearly contradicting something else or needed to be corrected, we changed it, but otherwise we left that as is. So I'm sure there'll be a number of points that come up today where council identifies that policy seems a little odd, or what does that mean? That should be clarified. Those are important points, and we do want to record all those, but they likely wouldn't be addressed until the next official community plan review. And I also want to recognize that we have done some major restructuring in this OCP review. So we've taken the opportunity to rethink the overall order of content in the document and really tried to give it a tighter focus with the goal of improving the clarity and effectiveness of the document. I will get into that in just a little bit more detail in just a moment. So once again, to recap, when we did the community discussion, after that, we brought a number of decision points to council. Council considered 19 decision points, of which a number of them were advanced, and those are in the package. There were 4 of them where council opted not to pursue those opportunities or decisions. Okay, so now into the overall structure of the OCP, and it's slightly different than it was in the previous version, even though most of the content is the same. So when we considered structure in the first place, the first question we asked was, how will this document be used, and how could it be structured in a way that serves those particular user groups in the way that's the best? So if someone picks up a large document like this, they're probably going to want to quickly grasp the overall gist of the town, where the town's going, and what that vision is. So we put the vision right up at the start of the document. So if someone gets bored after 5 pages, they've already kind of gotten the idea of what the real core identity of the town is. So from there, we transitioned into town-wide policies. So that's given a little bit more detail as to what that vision is and how it actually translates into policies on a town-wide basis. So, we started at the vision, went down one level to policies that affect the entire town. And then there's essentially 2 categories of discussion after that, and that gets into specific land use designations. And then they're in 2 broad categories: land use designations within the village neighborhood or land use designations outside of the village neighborhood. Because that's been, for a number of OCPs, that has been the divider in terms of recognizing where the town wants to focus development and redevelopment, and where the town recognizes there's a little bit less pressure outside. And just to highlight how that's slightly different than the previous version, in the previous version, there was a section on light industrial. But the light industrial policies were combined together, even though the policies related to things inside the village neighborhood were very different than the policies outside the village neighborhood. So if you think of it from the perspective of someone using this document, they're going to look on the map and say, I want to know what's possible on this piece of land. And whereas previously they would have looked at a section of policies that combine things that were applicable to them and things that were not applicable to them, now they can look in the document and go to where it's actually relevant to them, and it won't be mixing up content that's not relevant. So that's a fairly significant structural change, but I think it's a good foundation for this OCP review and also future OCP updates. This is a little hard to read on the screen, but essentially what this is just describing where things went from the previous OCP. So as I mentioned, most of the content was just translated over to the new document, although in slightly different places. And just for reference, this whole presentation will be uploaded to the website. But for example, the introduction, that stays in the introduction. Vision statement, that went over to the new vision statement section. And for each section of the OCP, it says where it went, right? Because we're trying to be as transparent as possible in terms of how it was updated so that people can track those changes and compare it to make sure that we have maintained that commitment to transparency. So now I'd like to go into the decision points. Council is aware of what these were, but I want to specifically describe how they were implemented in this update to the OCP. The first decision point was that Council recommended that young people, families, workers, older seniors, and people with a disability be designated as a priority housing group. So that went into the housing section. And these are all the policies that relate to this specific decision point. So you can read the decision point, look up those individual policies, and make sure that they communicate the intention of that decision point. Decision point number 2 was recognizing the area around the airport and designating a new airport area designation. So that there's policies that were incorporated there, section 4.4. There's also changes to the overall land use map to reflect that. Decision point 4 was related to the estate residential properties, and the decision point there was that the policies related to the estate properties be retained. So essentially no change, but where you can find the details on those policies is in section 4.1.1, also in the maps. Decision point 5 relates to the circumstances where the town might consider a boundary extension. And it states that the town would only consider a boundary extension when a significant environmental and community benefit can be secured. So this was translated into new policies and a slight amendment to a previous policy. So you can find those policy 2.1, 0.1.6, and 2.1.2.3. Number 7, there was a decision about whether the town wanted to reconsider its commitment to maintaining the agricultural land reserve, and the direction from council was that direction not be changed at this time. So there continues to be a policy in the OCP about retaining agricultural land reserve land. Decision point number 8, and that recognizes that we have a number of institutional uses throughout the community, and council recommended that in the future, should those institutional uses want to incorporate some degree of residential, that would have some policy support in the OCP. So it's not saying that suddenly all these have zoning to support residential, but should one of those institutional uses want to pursue it, there's a policy foundation to do so, and that's in policy 4.5.8. Decision point 9 relates to a property at 1085 Ravensbourne Lane, which is within that airport area, so it's somewhat of a repetition, but council did support that designation being changed to allow some more flexibility. So it's no longer rural on the land use map, and there is a policy specifically addressing that in section 4.4. Decision point 10 related to the urban containment boundary in the west side of Qualicum Beach. So previously, there was consideration for what was referred to as the West Qualicum Beach Open Space Development Area. That was a designation going back almost 30 years, and there had not been any notable progress towards actually developing a node out there. So there are updates to policies and an update to the map related to this. So in the future, should those landowners want to advance a change again to develop some land in West Qualicum Beach, then that would be a new discussion with council at the time. Decision point 11, and that relates to the ALR, the non-ALR parcels south of Rupert Road, but outside of the urban containment boundary. And the direction was that policies should be incorporated to recognize that there could be some flexibility on those uses if the proposed uses significantly advance one of the main OCP goals. And what this does is it provides a little bit of foundation for council to consider changes to properties such as the former garden center that could have some land use that does support one of the primary OCP goals. It could also, this policy support would also potentially allow subdivision of the existing large residential parcels there that are currently subdivided by strata. They could potentially look at dissolving the strata. Of course, subject to a zoning amendment in both those cases. Decision point 13, council considered whether or not the town should advance a requirement that all residential building lots in the town require a minimum of 2 dwelling units. That wasn't advanced, and the direction that was provided was that new land, as supported by a zoning amendment within the village neighborhood, should have a minimum of 2 dwelling units per lot, and that's in policy 3013. Decision point 14. So this addresses some of the possible ways that the town could get involved in advancing housing development for these priority housing groups. And there's 4 specific ways that are identified. However, it's important to note that when council considered this one, they didn't want to predetermine, council didn't choose to predetermine the specific preferred way of advancing housing. So what that means is essentially council will decide on a case-by-case basis in the future, rather than predetermining through an OCP policy. Decision point 15 relates to the criteria and process for addressing proposed housing developments. I think we've recognized that sometimes at the council table, there's confusion as to what OCP compliance is, and ultimately that decision rests with council. However, staff have to put forward a recommendation, and it's useful to have a criteria or a worksheet so that when we do provide a recommendation to council, we can provide this worksheet and say, based on these criteria, it appears to comply, and then council could make a decision either way. Decision point 17 relates to the interim residential design guidelines that were first adopted last year in 2024. And those design guidelines have been essentially integrated into the OCP and zoning structure now so that they're permanent. The title has been changed to Small-Scale Residential Form and Character Design Guidelines, and that's to distinguish them from design guidelines that are intended to apply to larger format multi-residential developments, which is the Residential Form and Character 2 guidelines. Decision point 18 was direction from council that staff were to work with the OCP Review Steering Committee to discuss these proposed changes to the OCP structure. So we did do that in terms of wrestling with how to structure the OCP in a way that's most useful to these groups. So a lot of the points that I've raised today came up and evolved through that OCP Review Steering Committee discussion. And decision point 19 relates to the role of the OCP, and I think this one warrants a little bit more explanation and context. So I think it's apparent that the town has many, many plans that have been developed over the last 70 years. What's not clear is which of those plans are actually still to be referred to, and which ones have just kind of withered on the vine, I guess you could say. Because the town has an official process for adopting plans, but there's never a point at which the town says, that plan is no longer a plan. Don't refer to that one anymore. So that's quite confusing, because you can look back and you can say, well, that plan was adopted in 2007. Should we refer to it or not? And so what that challenge suggests is that there's a role for the OCP in essentially acting as an index, so that if you're looking at the OCP, you will know what plans are relevant, which ones are important, and if it's not on that list, then essentially it's not a current plan. So what the hierarchy, which is completely identified in the draft OCP, you have your official community plan and your financial plan and your strategic plan, and those are really the triumvirate of town policy, right? Between those three, they identify goals, they resource those goals, and they identify council's priorities in advancing those goals. So those are the big three, and then you get into other policies and plans, like the community transportation plan or the urban forest master plan. And all those main policies or all those main plans that we refer to on a regular basis, they're all listed in the OCP now. So that's the direction that we could see the OCP really being valuable in terms of recognizing that document and policy structure. And I would also note that there are some plans that are listed on the list in the OCP that have not been developed yet. So for example, through discussions about Eagle Crest, for example, it came up a lot that Eagle Crest warrants a plan. It doesn't. The only neighborhood in Qualicum Beach that currently has a plan is the Village neighborhood. So there's an opportunity to do this at a more granular neighborhood level. So the current draft OCP does identify that Eagle Crest, Chartwell, and Qualicum Woods warrant plans. And if there's other areas of town that council would like to specifically identify to put on the list for a neighborhood level plan, then we could add that to this section. And decision point 19 also addresses the better integration of the sustainability plan. Council would be aware that the sustainability plan in the previous draft, the current OCP, is basically an appendix. And sometimes the policies in the sustainability plan are complementary to the OCP, and sometimes they don't quite align. So in advancing with this current draft, we took the sustainability plan goals, and we took the existing OCP goals, and we essentially melded them together into one combined set of goals. And that was done in collaboration with the OCP Review Steering Committee. So also helpful because in the previous draft, all of the regional districts goals were listed as town goals, which is confusing because they weren't the town's goals, and there wasn't a compelling reason to list them again as if they were town goals. So now it's very clear the town has goals, and all the regional district goals are recognized in the appendix, which is the regional context statement, which recognizes the consistency. We discussed the overall structure. I won't repeat that again. Okay, so this is also really important in terms of improving the document for clarity and usability. So if you go through the updated draft of the OCP, there's a very, very consistent structure. So every section now starts with an intent statement. So what is the goal? What is the intention of that specific land use or policy area within the town? What are we trying to get out of it? Then every one of those sections will have a discussion about how this policy area, like whether it's a a particular land use in the village or neighborhood or otherwise, how it directly relates to the overall OCP goals. So when you see goals listed in one of these sections, it's explaining how this particular land use or section supports those goals. And so there's a little bit of discussion on each one. And you'll also find that there's a new navigation bar at the bottom. So when you're working through this document, even though it is shorter, I'm very happy to say, it's still a long document. So you essentially can identify your place in the overall document just by looking at the footer there. So as council and the public work through the reading of this document, I wanted to be clear on the resources that staff have provided to make that process easy. And essentially that means that the town on the website has another version of this whole document where every section of the updated OCP has a comment on it that tells you exactly where it came from. And I know it's unreadable on the screen up here, but it will say the previous policy reference. So you can look at the old OCP, look at the new OCP, and you'll know exactly where everything came from. And if it's a change that's new, it'll say which decision point it came from, or whether it's just a correction. So I think it's completely transparent as to where this new document came from. If you look at the version that's online with the track changes and compare it with the old and the new. Next steps. So we are now at November 1st, which is scheduled for first reading of this OCP amendment bylaw, which is essentially a new draft of the OCP. The schedule would have second reading on November 20th with a public hearing on December 3rd, potential adoption on the 10th. What's important about that is that first reading doesn't lock anything in, and since it was first published, we've gotten a lot of comments. I think that's the real benefit of crowdsourcing an OCP to 1,000 people. You get lots of constructive criticism about everything from formatting to policy comparisons and such. So between first and second reading, I don't think you'll see monumental changes like sections dropping off or being added, but I think you will see a lot of minor changes, and we would very much welcome any member of council or any member of the public to provide those in writing, and we're going to try to incorporate as many as we can before second reading. Between second reading and the public hearing, changes can still happen, but the scale or the granularity of those changes starts to tighten up. So you don't want to be making major changes between second reading and the public hearing, but we can continue to update minor policy elements. After the public hearing, at that point, of course, we won't be welcoming comments from the public because it's intended that the public comment period would be closed, but staff could still be going through and making minor refinements to the plan. If anyone has comments or wants to submit feedback, there's a few options. Written feedback would probably be our preference, because it's most usable. We can compare and identify where there's overlap and common themes. But people can always call or make appointments as well, so we'd welcome those kinds of personal interactions. The public hearing on December 3rd, that would be the chance to speak directly to council. And I know that earlier when I mentioned that there's lots of policies in the plan that we didn't make updates to, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of comments about those sections. So it's just everyone be prepared. We're going to be having this discussion today and the next few meetings about the things we changed and the things we didn't change and exactly why. With that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chair. I'd be pleased to take any questions.
Okay, so this is going to be a very long process, I think, today. My initial suggestion for council is that we start going through this in small sections, and as opposed to just going through the long list of everything we might say, just because it might be one councillor for 20 minutes. And I think that way we can also get all of council weighing in on each section individually, and that might be beneficial for also the public when they're reviewing this meeting, so that we're not flipping back and forward to each individual councillor going through their long list. So with that, are there initial questions before we start looking at the OCP? And I'm thinking of things like maybe the timelines for public engagement, any questions we might have on that? Okay, with that, Councillor Young, please.
Given that the OCP is a serious document that we abide by, and with all due respect to our professional staff, when a proposal for a development comes along and it goes to first reading and it's been recommended that it should go to the OCP, I feel that we on council, many of us are just lay people, that we should not be able to vote that down, and we should be able to take the recommendations and have a broader lens on a development proposal looked at by the advisory committee that is also with very learned professionals in development and architect. So this is more of a governance thing, because I know just more recently we voted down something. It did not get to first reading or to the advisory committee.
Okay, so I would caution, though, that we probably shouldn't talk about specific developments too much at this stage, just because this is sort of 30,000-foot level conversation. It's going to be very philosophical and slightly pretentious, I'm sure, at times. But I do take consideration of, there was a decision point that was listed about how things are OCP compliant or not. Is that sort of where you're going in that direction, Councillor Young? No, it's more, okay, so more that in that case, maybe it would have been helpful to hear from the APC. I guess that's more of a comment than something structural for our OCP process today. If I'm hearing that comment correctly, my apologies if I'm getting it wrong. Okay. So with that, then, let's dive into the fun of actually going through this section by section. So starting then with section 1. So this is the 30,000-foot level community vision, OCP goals and general policies, et cetera. I think I'll go from left to right because I know Councillor Skipsey has several points. Is there anything in section 1 sort of overall that you want to draw attention to, Councillor Skipsey?
There was just one comment, I think, because I think the next one, my next comment would be in the next section. But anyways, on page 21, we talk about what an OCP review process looks like. And I know we talked quite a bit about this the last time we reviewed the OCP. And I just wanted to make a comment that one of the things we had always done in the past was provided our residents with a hard copy of the quality of life survey, and we didn't do that this time. So if we find that our numbers are declining and we want to try to get our numbers up, the number of responses, that we might look at doing that again.
Okay. Is there any comment from staff, or is that just sort of duly noted? Mr. Sales, please.
Yes, thank you. So if council would like to amend this section to clarify that intention to mail the entire survey to every household, it would be helpful to have that as a motion of council, so that we're clear on what is a direction to staff and what is a comment that we may or may not advance.
I would suggest at this time, if you want to make the motion for debate, I think that'd be reasonable, but I'd have a few questions. Or is it just a comment at this time, Councillor Skipsey?
Well, I think at this time, but maybe I'll just put a mark by it so we could come back to it if we wanted later on.
That's entirely fair, too, because there are also operational implications, and so it's something that we probably don't want to just vote on without having a little bit more context. And just because section 1 sort of goes to about page 29, I think. Is there anything further from section 1?
Yeah, so I guess one of my concerns would be around the local and neighborhood area plans. I think I like the idea of having plans for different neighborhoods because I think each neighborhood is unique. But like I noticed in my neighborhood in particular, there's a lot of older buildings. And it's been going through huge transition over the last 5 years. And so I think it would be helpful in some of the more established neighborhoods to also have some kind of vision, policy, guidelines and whatnot. And I can also think of like up behind like the Hermitage and that area, maybe at some point we want to look at that neighborhood. So I hope that by just identifying a few different areas that we aren't saying that it couldn't apply more broadly.
Thank you. Any comments from staff?
Yes, thank you. So if council is supportive, I think maybe we could introduce a policy that would open the door to other neighborhoods being considered if council wanted to advance them through strategic planning. So whether it's Hermitage or, you know, your neighborhood or any other area of town where council wants to focus specifically. In terms of the process, the way I would see that panning out is the plan is developed, and then the next OCP review, that plan gets listed as, you know, one of the plans. So once again, reinforcing that if the OCP is an index, if we want to develop new plans, we'll add them at the next one. So,
Oh, no, thank
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. So once again, just so we have absolute clarity, if council wants to advance with a policy like that, it would be helpful to have that as a motion so that we know, yes, we should make that change, or maybe not.
Councillor
Okay, well,
Skipsey?
maybe I'll, as we go through, I'll spend a little bit of time sort of thinking what the motion would be exactly, and then we can come back to it, if that's fair.
And I do think, too, the idea of referring essentially to strategic planning as each of these neighborhood plans will have a staffing component, a public outreach component that's going to have operational implications. And if, assuming that we might be fortunate with the Qualicum Commons, we definitely have Eagle Crest. There's going to be a lot of work over the next few years for our planning staff to be going through and a lot of consultation. So I just caution people when they see these neighborhood plans to not expect them to be done immediately because we have just finite amount of staff time. Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Chair. And just because we're halfway through this year's strategic planning, it would be a future year's strategic planning, just for clarity.
Yeah, I don't think you could just drop this on our staff for this year operationally. Forgive me for laughing a bit, but I just know how slammed our planning staff is right now. So it's a great idea. It's just, it will take some time. Is there anything further, Councillor Skipsey? Okay, I do take to heart the idea that you're sort of debating how do we get wording for the idea of other neighborhood plans and how we put that into strategic planning at a future date. So I've got a mental note of that. So then, again, just focusing on section 1, Councillor Vanderbalk, were there any concerns you had?
Well, I have, first of all, just for clarity, in terms of, you said section 1 goes to page 29. Are you talking about page 29 of our agenda, or you're talking about page 29 of the OCP, because they're two separate pages? And I
Excellent
have
point.
my questions all by numbers of page, so.
Oh, okay, so that would be page 16 of the OCP, I believe, 29 of our, is it 29 of our agenda overall, I believe? I'm going by the red numbers on the bottom of the page.
Okay. So I've gone through, I did have a lot of questions about, as Director Sales mentioned, where did this come from and why, you know, what is this about? And we're not addressing particular things. We're only looking at housing. So I've tried to cull through my questions and have them more definitely in terms of housing. I do share the concern with Councillor Skipsey about neighborhoods, but I have another concern that's related to that, is there a way that we can have, we've got all these neighborhoods that have different land uses, but it seems to me that we don't have necessarily an overall plan for the entire town. So are you seeing the OCP as that overall plan, or do we need to have a plan that keeps all the separate neighborhoods in mind so that it's not a piecemeal development, but it is a little more cohesive. So that would be my question.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervalk. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Vandervalk. So the OCP is that overarching town-wide plan, but it does get additional clarity from other plans like the community transportation plan or the Heritage Forest Plan or the Urban Forest Master Plan or those plans that are identified in the OCP. They essentially give more clarity and focus to specific topics or geographical areas.
Thank you very much. Any further questions, Councillor Vandervalk?
Not at this point. That relates specifically to housing in that section. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Young.
When Mr. Sales mentioned about each community having their plan, yet on page 21, it mentions that removing barriers to allow demographic diversity. Can we define demographic diversity? Like, do we not want each community to have its own real estate value and not have demographic diversity?
Mr. Sales.
That's on point 1.21.
Thank you, and thank you through the chair to Councillor Young. That specific clause of that point was brought up yesterday. Another person asked about it, and that's one that was directly translated from the previous OCP. And my recollection was it was mostly about demographic diversity in terms of trying to accommodate a broader range of, say, income levels and housing types. But essentially, in this OCP, we just didn't even consider changing that. That's one of the clauses that we just ported directly from the previous OCP because we didn't have a chance to ask the public what they wanted to do for about demographic diversity. And I think this answer will come up over and over. Part of the promise to the public was we were focused on housing. So from staff, it would be hard to recommend a change that was outside of that promise because otherwise the public didn't have a chance to discuss it.
And I would also, thank you, Mr. Soto, I also just sort of gently suggest that when we're discussing the idea of neighborhood plans, because this is somewhat embryonic, when we have staffing to actually proceed with that, it'll probably be the next council's term, forgive me, and the degree of granularity and the degree to which verbiage in the OCP is reflected in those neighborhood plans is probably going to be something that emerges from the consultation process, and I'm not sure really getting to the weeds of what each neighborhood plan specific points are is really the best use of our time right now. Eventually, it'll be a great decision point for council, but I think more at this stage, the question we should ask for neighborhood plans is, do we want to have them all together or not? And if we do, then this is something we're probably going to iterate on as those plans are developed subsequently. And Mr. Sales can correct me if I'm way off base. I'm seeing a nodding head, so I'm not going to assume I'm way off base. But I just suggest that this is something that, for all these plans, when we have a sustainability plan and say we want to pursue that, we don't immediately start off saying this is what the sustainability plan is going to be. We go to a consultant, we develop the document, then it comes back to us. So I just suggest that it's a great conversation to think about these things, but it's also too, it's going to unfurl naturally as we proceed. Sorry. Councillor Young.
And then going to page 19 on number 1. We talk about the Qualicum Beach Village character. Should it not be changed to town character? We are a town now. And then going also to 1.2.3, we talk about efficiency of subdivision and building construction. We seem to be focused on more of the physical look of a building and a development, and yet we are all about green initiatives, green buildings on number 8 there. Why don't we have a section on like recommended solar panels, recommended windows, recommended other efficiencies. All I've seen so far is permeable surfaces. I don't see a focus of numerous pages like we do have on the color of a building or the dormers that we should have. And I think, should we advance our thought process into more of a modern concept, but still maintaining a town character? Is that possible?
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Interesting discussion, and yeah, oftentimes council does weigh the benefits of the form and character versus the other things that the OCP is asking for. I don't know that it's something that we can address I don't know if we can completely address it through this OCP policy. I think it's more related to council decision points. It may also come up during the ways to achieve attainable market housing project, which we're transitioning to in the new year. So I don't have a direct policy answer, but I think it's more of a recommendation for the future is trying to balance those different priorities.
I'd also point out, too, that Appendix 5, which is the draft sustainability plan, does have some specific verbiage to making buildings solar ready and a few other things that are more green initiatives. So there is sort of included in the OCP. It's in the appendix of the end, and it's, I missed it too, because initially I didn't realize there was an Appendix 5, and I thought I was done my homework before the council meeting. Turns out I wasn't. But there is some language, to Councillor Young's point. It's just not in this section of the OCP. So the question is maybe just something for us to consider, but as we go to second reading, is do we want to include that language here as well? More overt references to sustainability plan. It's sort of overt. It's referenced throughout the document, so it's not that those references aren't there, but the extent to which we wish to highlight this or not. But yeah, sorry, I'm trying to mediate the 2 points here. My apologies if I'm getting it wrong. Anything else, Councillor Young?
Just one other little thing. Going back to number 1, we talk about on page 19 is about complete compact community land use. So we always use a guideline of 3 stories. Would we consider 4 stories? Because presently in our community, we have 5-story buildings, we have 6-story buildings. So could we just up it by 1 story on our recommendations? Is that a possibility to consider?
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So there is a policy later in the plan that indicates that 3 stories is preferred. Additional height can be considered if council addresses specific decision-making criteria. So that's a policy later. If council does want to go with something different than what's in the current draft, we can make that change, but it's later in the document. Thank you.
I believe it's in section 3, which references to the village neighborhood, and it's only the village neighborhood, which is a specific reference to the building height. But you are quite correct. We could make it 4 as a default if we wish, or leave it at 3. Is that okay, Councillor Young? Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Okay. Sorry, Councillor Skipsey and then Councillor Vandervalk. My apologies.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a comment to that, or a question to staff. I think some of the recommendations were coming out of the public consultation, and my understanding was this 3 stories with others being considered was something that came out of the consultation. Couldn't I just get that confirmed, please?
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. That was a policy that was existing in the OCP. However, the consultation essentially reaffirmed that the community still likes that approach.
Councillor Vandervalk, was that roughly similar, or my apologies?
I did also have that point, that a lot of the information that is in the OCP draft definitely came out of the public consultation. So yes, that's correct. And I did want to make a comment about, it has come up a couple of times in the last couple of days about Qualicum Beach village character, and that we're not a village anymore. I think that the intent of that is for the character, the feel or vibe, whatever you want to call it. So if you want to change it to town, then I would suggest small town character. because I don't think people want to have a big city character. So it is an important reference to what I think also came out of the public engagement, was people definitely value that small town character. And if I might, there was something else that I have in my notes that came up. Again, just in terms of OCP goals and general policies, I do have a question about community health, point number 3. This is on page 19. On the last statement, it says provide the town, well, essentially the town, should provide residents with access to social, cultural, and healthcare services, as well as access to participation in community life, arts, and culture. Again, the town's ability to provide healthcare, I think, is difficult. It's a difficult question. So I'm not exactly sure if the town should be expected to provide residents to that. So it might need a little bit of rewording, because I don't think we're in a position to actually provide healthcare.
Mr. Sales, any comments on that?
Thank you. We can look at that wording. It could be that some other language like facilitate or, provide policy. I don't know. We can look at that, because we do not directly provide the things that are in that list. So if that's how it's being read, then that should be changed.
Also, to elsewhere in the document, the verbiage support is used quite frequently as the verb. And so in this case, it'd be support residents' access to social, cultural, and healthcare. It would be one potential way. It is verbiage that shows up in several points later on in individual policies, more in section 3 and 4, where it starts saying what sort of diverse uses are supported. And I think to Councillor Vandervalk's point, if we're going to say we're going to provide healthcare services, we really need to have an election and suss that out and make sure folks are really on board, because to be fair, I don't think any of us ran on providing healthcare. So it's an excellent point. I do think some of these finicky verb things are actually really quite important. Is there anything else, Councillor Vandervalk? My apologies. Okay.
Not at the moment, thank you.
Okay, well, one last scan. Councillor Young.
I'm surprising myself. Okay, in regards to agricultural reserve land, our goals are to sustainable food system, diversity of housing, at least economic prosperity, that kind of thing. So when there's a piece of property that is adjacent to our urban containment boundary, and it is an agricultural reserve land, and if they can come up with an innovative idea of how there could be food growing there, there could be small housing there, would we consider entertaining that and supporting it to go forward to the Agricultural Reserve Land Commission?
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So council did debate this at considerable length when that decision point came up. So I don't think rehashing the discussion will be beneficial at this point. So I'm not going to provide an answer other than reference to that previous discussion.
That's entirely fair. I would point out, too, this is an area of significant provincial jurisdiction where they really dictate what happens on ALR land to a massive degree. So, but as Mr. Sells indicated, we had this debate before, so I'll just note that. Councillor Young.
But I just want to take into consideration that time goes on, and the density of housing is always much more needed as time goes on. Food supply chain is also much more needed. So I know we may have debated it in the past, but I think with some more work into that plan, that maybe we can come up with something that could be acceptable by the Agricultural Land Commission, and just for us to have an open mind is what I'm asking for.
That's not unreasonable. Just, if I may, to staff, I believe our strategic plan has a document for food sustainability 2 or 3 years out from now, if I recall correctly. It was one of the things that was advanced in strategic planning previously. And I think some of the clarity around the fine details of this would come as a result of that if it's carried forward with the next council, just given the timelines. So if I'm incorrect on that, Ms. Varela?
No, you are correct, Chair. I don't have the date at my fingertips, but it was one of the initiatives that was deferred to an outer year based on the Eagle Crest purchase. Thank you.
I would hesitate to guess 2027 because that was a generic year everything fell into for a lot of initiatives. Mr. Sales.
Thank you. I just want to highlight that a sustainable food strategy is listed on the list of plans in the OCP that has not yet been completed on the basis of council's direction. So thank you.
And I do want to highlight too, this is a good debate. It's good to have this discussion about how that land could best be utilized and how to also support the small businesses that are small family farms in our area, because they're having a difficult time making things work optimally. So it's a good debate, but I do think we're going to kind of move on at this point, as I think we've sort of hashed it out. Anything else, Councillor Young? Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I do have a couple of motions if we want to do them now or if we want to wait till the end. So,
I think it'd be better to do them within the section they're in.
Okay.
Also for the public, when they're looking at this, Section 1 is a coherent block on YouTube, Section 2 is a coherent block. So that's my thinking, at least. My apologies if I'm wrong.
So with regard to my earlier comment about the quality of life survey, and I think this is a really important piece of work that we do to hear from our residents directly. So I would like to amend the first bullet of 1.2.5 on page 21 to say that a quality of life survey sent to every household, rather than, so survey would replace invitation.
Thank you very much. So that's essentially an amendment then to the existing wording. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Van der Valk? Any subsequent discussion? Just for myself, I know my dad can't even turn on a computer, let alone use one. So it's not unreasonable in my view that we should have a discussion of making sure in a community where not everyone is as computer literate as some of the younger folks might be, that they still have that ability to do things by paper. I will recognize too, though, staff did have that option in town hall. So just to be fair to staff, they did have that option, but I'm not sure how well utilized it was, to be fair. So with that, no further debate. All those in favor of the amendment? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next motion, Councillor
Okay,
Skipsey.
the next one was about the local and neighborhood area plans on page 26. And I'm okay with the first four. I think that that's a good idea. The bus garage concept design and report, the waterfront master plan, airport area plan talks about, and then the Eagle Crest neighborhood plan. I think, we've committed to doing that through the recent purchase of the Eagle Crest golf course. So, but I thought perhaps after that we could make a statement like that additional neighborhood area plans be considered at the future discretion of council or direction of council. So I would move that.
Seconder, Councillor Van der Valk. Any further discussion on that point? Yeah. Oh, sorry. So Councillor Young just pointing out that we do have this wording for the Chartwell and Qualicum Woods neighborhood plan. Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So if I'm understanding the discussion, the Chartwell neighborhood plan and Qualicum Woods neighborhood plan would be removed and replaced by a clause indicating that additional neighborhood plans can be developed at the discretion of future council decision-making.
Is that, Councillor Skipsey, is that what you, okay. Any further discussion on that point? I'll just add too that I think that's quite reasonable. We have made very public commitments to Eagle Crest because of the scope of what's being proposed. And the airport plan too, I'm sure there's a lot of interest. And it would be good to make sure that other areas which might have a significant population aren't excluded just because they don't technically have a residents association at present. So I do think Councillor Skipsey's resolution is reasonable. And with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any?
Can we have discussion still?
Oh, sure. My apologies, Councillor Young. Go ahead.
I'd like to leave it open until we have the public input, just because, I can't speak for Chartwell. Maybe they would like to have a policy about the character of their neighborhood, and the same with Qualicum Woods. I'd like to leave it for public intake first.
Any comment from staff on that? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. My apologies.
Yes, thank you. So changes can be made after the public hearing, but we do need to go one way or the other in terms of the draft that gets carried forward until now. So in other words, we can leave it as is, and if we hear from the public saying, why are these two in here and why are these other areas not in here, then we could replace it with language like Councillor Skipsey is describing, or alternatively, you could replace these two areas with the language we were just discussing, and if they stand up and say, hey, what about us? We really want a plan, then you could add it later. So we just needed a direction one way or the other. Either way is workable.
I just point out that I don't think the wording excludes those two areas, and I think this is something too that a future council, this is going to be, each of these is going to be a very involved process, and they're going to have to schedule that probably in different years. So it's reasonable to maybe not have everything as locked in just yet. But your point that other areas could be included in future is a good point. So with that then, now I'll call the question again. All those in favor? Sorry, passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, any further questions for section 1 from any other member of council? Councillor Vandervalk.
Yeah, I just have a general comment or question, and I'm not sure if it's in section 1 because it's one of the things that I don't have my page reference to, but somewhere in the document you emphasize that the plans for the village neighborhood are to build it out. The long-term plan for the village neighborhood is to build it out. So I'm just wondering if in that, are you essentially saying this is the death of the single-family home in the village neighborhood? Because is that the intention? Because that's where most of the densification is going to happen. So it's just a general question.
Thank you.
Mr. Sales.
Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey. So yes, when the town in, I guess it would, oh, my apologies, Vanderbalk. When the town first really started to emphasize the village neighborhood, and I think it was the 1998 OCP, essentially, yes, the entire area was contemplated as something other than single detached dwellings. I would also remind everyone that the town no longer has any neighborhoods in the town that are zoned for single detached dwellings, with the exception of a few subdivisions that were stratas, and they are what they are. So just a reminder, we don't have single detached dwelling neighborhoods anymore.
Councillor Vandervalk.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. I've heard that phrase bandied about sometimes in urban planning circles. Councillor Skipsey.
I do have one more question about topic-specific policy plans on page 27. The town had a community climate change adaptation plan done that would apply throughout the town. So I wondered if that should be added or not.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Excellent suggestion. That's just an omission.
Yeah, that was a 6-digit grant, if I recall correctly, so it'd be good to include that. Anything further? Okay, I finally get to go. First off, just on page 19, when we're looking at the OCP goals and policies, I don't have a suggestion where to rank them, but I would point out that the previous council, we had 3 members of council who are still here, who declared a climate, housing, and healthcare emergency. And it's kind of common theme, like next year's UBCM was the exact same theme of polycrisis. It sort of entered the lingo. And I just point out that we might want to think about the order in the reflection of, sort of reflecting how those 3 things are sort of each their own priority. The only other thing too, I don't have a problem personally with the phrase number 5, progressive infrastructure, but I would note there are certain words which are taking on a political valence now, unfortunately. And I don't want people to think that our approach to infrastructure is driven by ideological concerns as opposed to more practical concerns, things which align with long-term vision for the town. So I'd go offline for a couple suggestions, but it's just something to consider. If anything was conservative, small l liberal, small l, small p progressive, that I don't want it to become something where it becomes, forgive me, a rallying cry for folks. I doubt that would happen, but you never know. The internet never ceases to surprise me. Beyond that, yeah, I'll just take offline suggestions of different ranking things, because I don't think there's a lot of point trying to figure out today which number is which. That would just be 15 minutes of. Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Chair. It may be worth noting that in the document that these aren't provided in order of ranking of importance. Like, I've seen that in documents, so perhaps that would negate the need to have that debate, is simply to clarify those aren't listed in order of priority.
Yeah, I think that actually would help, and then it's forestalls that. The only thing I noticed just later on the document, just to get on the same point, is that the order is replicated throughout the entire document. So for some areas, something which is number 1 on this section might not be number 1, say for the village neighborhood, it might be a different number. But then it's also too, do we really want to bog staff down with having to try to rank things for each section of the OCP? And that would be a lot of time, and we don't have time. So that point is fair. Next thing is section 1.2.4, which is essentially referring to CACs, or more or less, it's the voluntary development things. And I just want to highlight that I believe the provincial legislation for ACCs, amenity contribution charges, doesn't that sort of dictate this? I don't know if we can, I'm not saying we remove it, but I'm just wondering, does that provincial legislation basically dictate this through density bonusing and ACCs? Or should we have a separate town policy additional to that?
Thank you. So if the town does want to use the ACC legislation in the future, we do need a bylaw for that. So that is listed in the framework as something to develop in the future. So the ACC legislation doesn't preclude a community from having a CAC policy, so I don't think it needs to be removed at this time, but I think when the town gets to the point of an ACC policy, this policy might want to be revisited.
Because I would note too that Councillor Skipsey frequently reminds us it'd be great to update our DCC bylaw, and that's something I'm sure in the next term I would, well, I'm not sure, I would hope we address. Next thing too, just to follow up on that mention earlier of the polycrisis 1.2.6, it just might be good. I know we do have to have climate change impacts, really impacts our infrastructure and to some extent our built environment. So it is good to have a separate point for that. I'm not sure if we want to reflect that in this language in this section, but I think it actually is fine as is. I just wanted to flag that. Next, for page 23, point 2 of townwide policies. This is really pedantic, but land acquisition and DPAs. We have a land acquisition policy for the waterfront, but it's not a townwide acquisition policy. And DPAs are localized to different parts of town. So I'm wondering, there's no real other place for them in that section? Because there isn't an area for area-specific policies. It just says townwide policies. So I guess they fit best there, but I'm just wondering, Mr. Sales, if you could.
I'm not 100% clear on what you're suggesting, but can we take that offline, or maybe you can provide me some more detail?
And I don't think having a separate section for two things is really that productive. I think most people would get it when they read through things, but just sort of highlighting that these are not townwide land acquisition policies. We don't have a townwide acquisition policy at present. And I don't think we have the money for that either. And I think that's it. Yep, that's already been addressed. And the last thing is just on page 26 for core plans. I know it's mentioned elsewhere for the housing needs report as a topic-specific plan, but would that also be a core plan? Because pretty soon we're going to be legislated, forgive me, I think we're on the list of communities that are going to have mandated housing targets in the near future. So I'm just wondering, should that be in the core plan section?
Thank you. So at this time, the province hasn't specifically said that the town will get a housing target. Their letter to us said that the town may get a housing target, so
Okay.
as to drag on the ambiguity for even longer. So when the province makes a decision, I think we can respond accordingly, but either by updating this or otherwise. So I think it's okay as is.
Okay.
because the province hasn't been specific. Thank you.
Excellent point. I would also point out, too, I have some qualms about the numbers that are in our housing needs assessment, so that's a whole other aside. And with that, I believe I'm finished that entire section. Moving on to section 2, and forgive me, I'm not quite as organized as I'd like to be for this mammoth undertaking. I'm trying to find the last page of section 2, just so we're clear, and also for Councillor Vandervalk's benefit as well. Because I think she has everything written down by page number. And with that, I'll just start with Councillor Skipsey in section 2, if there's any specific concerns you have. And then I'll find the last page as I'm listening to Councillor Skipsey.
Okay. Don't think there's too much earth-shattering, but on page 31, diversity of housing, we talk about advance by providing a variety of high-quality housing types, and that's just a little bit of a flag for me. High quality kind of equates to money, money, money signs, so I just wonder if we should just be careful about how we say that. Community health, I was hoping that we might add something about volunteerism, because that is a very strong and important value in this community. And I don't know where we're ending, but, oh, okay. Well then, page 39, we talk about sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions, but there really isn't a whole lot on sustainability. And I don't really think that it does it justice in what is listed here. It may be more to talk about the greenhouse gas emissions reduction and keep the sustainability perhaps to the sustainability plan. I don't know. I just don't think that what is listed here is really in depth enough to justify including it as part of that section. And then I just had a few questions about, were they private, public, both? Do they apply? I think that's it for now.
Any comments, Mr. Sales?
Thank you. So maybe after the discussion, we can consider any specific direction from council with regard to these. Otherwise, we can consider them on after the meeting, just on a case-by-case basis to improve clarity.
Absolutely not a problem at all. With that, Councillor Vandervalk.
Okay, let's see. So on page 43, on the very bottom, talking about, actually before that, on page 38. So the very last point on that page, the town should support public art through continued investment, especially in the new development projects. I'm not sure that, do we have a public art department, and have we purchased a lot of public art, and do we have a public art program? I'm just wondering where this came from.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So this was a policy that was ported from the previous OCP. If council doesn't want to retain it, we can delete it, but we didn't consult on it.
I'll just let Councillor Vandervalk know I added it circled as well. Anything further?
Well, if we're going to say, because we didn't consult on it, then we're not going to delete it, then I guess we leave it in, but make a note that this would be something that I would like to have looked at in the future.
Mr. Sales and Councillor Young.
Thank you. My answer was very brief. I can give a little bit more context that at the time that this was first incorporated, there was interest in developing a public art policy. So that is an option in the future if council wants to dedicate some resources to it. It unfortunately never made it past the inspiration stage in terms of actually translating it into a policy. So this is as far as the town got when this was originally drafted.
I now turn to our Culture and Arts Liaison, Councillor Young.
Well, I was thinking that it could be support for our one and only art gallery, that we could be supportive of some initiatives that they might come up with, and for us to further arts and culture is really important for our community well-being. So I would like to see that kind of support for our local gallery, not just for art pieces.
Okay. I do believe there's a scoping sheet as part of our strategic planning process, so that comment is duly noted. The only thing I would say to Councillor Vandervalk's point is, again, verb things is to maybe switch to may as opposed to should, just to make it less operative. Ms. Varela, my apologies.
No, just seeking clarification with reference to the scoping sheet. There isn't one at top of mind for me, so I just want to make sure.
I was thinking more if my understanding of Councillor Young's, I was reading between the lines, and my apologies, I shouldn't do that too much. But I was thinking she was speaking about support for a specific institution, and I think that's the TOSH fee-for-service, which is part of the strategic planning process at present.
Thank you, Chair.
And if I'm totally wrong, Councillor Young, okay. Yes, lucky me, I got it right that time. Okay, I should make a habit of it, though, all the same. Anything further, Councillor Young? Oh, sorry, no, we're at Councillor Vandervalk still. My apologies. Sorry, this is a lot. Sorry, Councillor Vandervalk.
So I would agree then with changing the wording rather than the town should support. It could be may support or could support, but I don't think it should be definite. Because it is talking about public art through continued investment, particularly in the new development projects. So I'm not exactly clear what that extent would be. So rather than saying, yes, we should, I would prefer that we could or might or may. Sure, I'll make a motion to that effect. To amend it to may.
Seconded by Councillor Skipsey. Sorry, Councillor Young, she got in first. Any further debate? I do think Councillor Vandervalk has the right of it. Seeing none, all those in favor? So just amendment on the verb for one word. Please carry on, Councillor Vandervalk.
Thank you. Then on page 43, on the very last point, 2.3.3.3, the town shall support the development of shelters for individuals experiencing homelessness and housing for individuals at risk of homelessness. If appropriate locations within the town of Qualicum Beach do not exist, the town shall support efforts by regional partners such as the Regional District of Nanaimo to provide these services. Again, I'm wondering where that came from, because I don't believe it came from the OCP public engagement discussions.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So just consulting with my colleague who drafted a lot of this wonderful wording. So in the updated requirements with regard to housing, there are certain types of housing that have to be specifically addressed in an official community plan. So it's now a legislative requirement to address housing for persons experiencing homelessness. So this clause was inserted. This is new, and it reflects that new requirement. So it needs to be addressed in some way. If this specific wording is not, could be improved, or council has suggestions as to how to improve it, we can certainly do that. But there does need to be a clause addressing persons experiencing homelessness. Thank you.
Councillor Vandervalk?
Well, perhaps again, we could change shall to may, or do you think that that is not within the public or the provincial intent?
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. I don't think that would conflict with the provincial requirements.
And I would point out too, if we get the nebulous requirement from the province to provide a certain number of units, in the detailed breakdown of the units that's provided by the province, they do include a number of supportive housing units. So that would be like Orca Place. But that's a different thing from a shelter. That is not the same thing. So I'm not familiar with the legislation on this point, so I'll just assume Mr. Sells has the right of it.
So then I would like to make a motion to amend the town shall to the town may support.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Skipsey, any further discussion on this? For my part, I do think there's a reasonable conversation of having may, absent a clear proponent in our community at present and absent a clear location. I wouldn't want to get ahead of that process. I'm not saying it's not a worthwhile endeavor. I'm just saying that I think there's a lot more work before we just say we're absolutely going to do this without that actual report from staff and liaising with the public. So with that, call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? Passes unanimously. Councillor Vandervalk, please continue.
Sorry, what page ends this section?
So 68 in the black and 81 in the red. I'm not sure which are the two.
Okay, so I don't have any further questions that, for that particular.
81. My apologies, Councillor Skipsey. If you want to go back and. I have a couple more. Okay, that's entirely fair because I read the wrong number for the red, so that's my fault. Please, Councillor Skipsey.
Oh, okay. Under municipal services 2.6, I guess we're thinking more around like physical services because under community health, it's all relates to physical health. And I wondered if there should be something a bit more broad than that, more about social health and whatnot. So I'm not sure what that wording would be. The other thing under active transportation on page 49, I did attend at UBCM a session on the new electric scooters that are piloting throughout the province and are a new thing that go up to 25 kilometers an hour if you don't fiddle with them and make them go faster. But so I think that that should be on our radar. I don't know if you want to include that or not. Thank you.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So active transportation, I don't think would include the scooters because they don't actually do anything. They just ride around on scooters. So I don't think it would qualify. It would qualify as low emissions for sure, but I don't think it'd be in the active transportation section.
Okay, okay. Also, too, I will note, I remember there was a reference to them somewhere, but I'm having a hard time placing it specifically within the document. I'll have to go home and reread it. Sorry, Councillor Skipsey. Okay, Councillor Young. Okay, so that then falls to me. Okay, I will note that I have the word village-like crossed off a few times with the word small town, as Councillor Vandervalk suggested. I do think, too, as we go through the document, so right now we have a lot of things in the village says village character. The waterfront master plan section says small town, town character. The original vision statement says small town. So I'm not sure how much we want to belabor things, but I do think small town is sort of what we are. I checked the census. Technically, we ceased being a village by population in 1981 census, which is roughly around the time I was born. Just as a point, I'm not sure we have to rewrite everything to have that consistent throughout. It would be relatively simple to do a Control F in the PDF, but at the same time, it's not something I want to get hung up on. I also, too, to Councillor Skipsey's point, I did have the high quality, and I just have the word define beside that. Like, what do we mean by high quality? High quality in terms of the highest quality for the site, or high quality for the identified group we're trying to house. Right, so high quality for the residences at Qualicum Station might mean something very different than high quality for someone who lives in Berwick. But I think that's not lost on staff. There are a few points in community health. So on page 36, 2.1.3, both C and D, there's things like to promote recreational opportunities. I'm not sure which verbs we want to use. So once again, do we use support or encourage, to encourage a level of healthcare, or do we support it? That, for me, is a difference in terms of, do we have a financial commitment? I'm just thinking in this term, we had a commercial lease for a healthcare facility for 2 years. We provided $5,000 direct funding to Flowerstone for recruitment, which is apparently bearing lots of fruit, so much so that they're really, they have some hard choices to make about how many people they have now and how much space they have. So that's, again, that's more than encouraging. That's what we've already done. So the question is, do we have support there or do we have encourage? I'm not sure I have a decision yet. I just want to flag that as something for us to think about, that's all. I do have a question on page 37, 2.1.3.2, and that one says, the town supports the development of health research and learning centers in the town of Qualicum Beach. And I'm just curious what that is, and if maybe we get some clarity on that.
Thank you. We'll have to look into that one to see whether it came as a transport from the old sustainability plan or whether it was directly from the OCP.
Yeah, because medical research and usually require proximity to a hospital, which we don't have in our region, in terms of whether it's a school of geriatrics or a school of medicine. That proximity is a key part of the actual student-teacher relationship. And the only university we have a lot of ties to is VIU, which does not have that sort of area of study yet, perhaps one day. Just for the next one too, 2.1.3.3, this is also probably just importing older language. Because Flowerstone doesn't operate on family doctors, it operates on nurse practitioners. Just some of the things where we say we want to encourage more doctors, just to then improve primary care, access to primary care, and just switching doctor to primary care, because technically nurse practitioners aren't doctors, and they do a great job. The last thing on this page 37, and I do apologize for the pedantry, is 2.1.3.10, and it's about young families and attraction. And the second number B, clearly defined range of entry points on rental or purchase housing. I'd just be very cautious with that. There's only so much we can actually do in terms of private sector. If we want to do something that's a public sector development, like the residences at Railway, it does have some of that built into the funding scheme through the province. But in terms of reaching those purchase points, I do think through the WAM process, we're probably going to get some more data on construction costs and what's the minimum viable project in Qualicum Beach. And I use $400 a square foot for residential construction as a rule of thumb, and you can just go from there. But I do think that if we're going to have an OCB policy about we're going to create different purchase points, is that the intent? Like that we're actually going to have work with developers to have rentals that are offered at different prices? Because that's something we should really clearly define before we start doing that with any private sector development. Mr. Sales.
Thank you. That particular clause, B, was one that when we reread it, it's not clear. And it's hard to go back and understand exactly the rationale. I know that particular clause came from the Youth and Young Families Retention and Attraction Strategy verbatim, but why it was written that way and what it exactly means isn't clear. So if council would like, we can strike that clause, because if you're not clear on what it means, I'm not clear on what it means, it might not be benefiting the OCP. So if that were a motion, we would certainly advance that. I do want to just clarify for you, Councillor Harrison, that the clause you were asking about earlier, about the research, we just looked it up. That was directly from the old OCP. So we can update it, but once again, it was just directly taken. Thank you.
And it's not something where I'm suggesting an immediate edit there. It's just, I was a bit curious because that suggests a very unique set of partnerships. I think for B, I'm not saying we should just delete it altogether, but I do think that in order to do that, if my understanding is correct, and again, the WAM study is probably going to provide more context, you would probably have to do some form of public-private partnership where you're essentially subsidizing units through waiving DCCs, relaxed taxation over a definite period. It's really hard to do that with market prices, but I'm not an expert on that. I'm sort of well-versed, but I would prefer to have solid data rather than just some assumptions on my part. Public art we talked about. Sorry. Okay, so a lot of stuff in the sustainability plan too. I think these things, correct me if I'm wrong, so page 41, it talks about specific targets, 50, 65, 80%. My understanding that this is essentially provincial legislation that mandates those targets at present. So this is something where this isn't the town coming up with this. This is sort of a legislative requirement, and I'm seeing a nod from one of the planners, so I'm assuming. Mr. Sales.
Yes, that's correct. So when this language was first incorporated, it was directly from the province's 2008 targets. And so they are a requirement to have greenhouse gas reduction targets in the OCP. So they mirror those provincial targets.
And then housing policy is writ large. You know I had to comment somewhere on this for that section. I just highlight again, this is page 43 of the red, 30 in the black. This is something where I think when we start getting real data about what the costs are, we'll have better conversations if we want as a town to start having those public-private partnerships. But I just suggest we want to make sure we have a very public conversation before we start. Whoever would be looking at that in the future, please don't work with a developer and say, I got something great, and then turns out they're getting 20 years with no taxes. I don't think that would go over well. So it's 2.3, just writ large, to incentivize facility housing, which is leverage unique things to serve future residents with a diversity of housing options. Unless you're talking about the built form, that's fine, but if you're talking about the price points, the earlier thing, you need to have some very awkward conversations about money. That's more what I'm coming from on that. My apologies. You're right, that's not very exactly clear. Okay. Sorry, this is such a huge section. The other one was, for me, 2.5, natural resources. I'm not sure if this is something that's just like a vestigial part of a previous OCP. It's not something we really do. We don't do mining or silviculture in the town boundary, so I'm just curious why that's sort of included, or is there just more to make sure that we don't have that conversation in the future? Mr. Sales?
Yes, thank you. So official community plans are required to have a section addressing natural resource development.
That answers my question. Thank you very much. Okay, and then I do appreciate the active transportation does have a map in the appendix for what the active transportation map is. Sorry, this is page 49 of the red. So where is it? It's one of these documents we got right after the, where is it? I think it's the last one. Yeah, it's the last one of these big pages. You can actually see the active transportation map. I'm just wondering, through the chair to Mr. Sales, is this something that's more broadly available historically? Like, do we have this sort of as a standalone thing for cycling groups or walking groups abound in Qualicum Beach? My dad's a part of one of them. So I'm just wondering, is that a document that's readily available at present? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So the maps that are referenced here and the community transportation plan maps, they don't necessarily reflect what actually exists on the ground. So we do have different maps. So whether you're a cycling group or a walking group, you can get those maps from the town in a different format. If you tried to follow the maps in the OCP right now, you would run into many dead ends or trails that don't exist.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. And I recognize you're a much greater expert on bicycling infrastructure than I am. There's a couple typos, which I'll just send an email to staff. They're just honest typos, so I don't think there's much point in going over that. We did sort of discuss in the sustainability plan on the bottom of page 51 in the red, the Green Streets pilot project. And I noticed that there's a target for the number of streets. Is that, maybe it's more pertinent when we're discussing the sustainability plan at all, but I'm just wondering, is this something where we're looking to do a pilot project, which is the wording in the OCP, or do we have the sustainability plan, which says, I think something like 2/3 of the town is going to be a green street by 2050. I forget the exact number, but it's a very relatively high number. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So this pilot project policy, this is directly from the old OCP. So it just says that the town should try to actually implement one of these green streets and see how it goes. The sustainability plan actually predated that policy. And so it identified a target for the percentage of streets that would be considered green streets. So going in chronological order, the sustainability plan said, hey, we should do this. We should do green streets. We should do 2/3 of them should be green streets. And then the next OCP update, the town said, we should try this first.
I appreciate approach number 2. Also, too, to get us a sense of the scope of what are the costs, because money is going to be a bit of a thing. Next is page 55. So for town objectives 2.6.3, letter B. And it's just to ensure that municipal drainage does not impact on the water quality of Granite Creek and Beach Creek. And my only concern here is just that it's an absolute, where it says does not impact as opposed to minimizes. Like, obviously, we don't want to have an impact. No one would disagree with that. But when we say does not, does that basically box us into a corner at all? My concern would just be like, well, if it's a hypothetical impact of if this happens and that happens, it could be an impact, so therefore you shouldn't do that. That's only my concern. Mr. Sales?
Thank you. If council wants to change the wording to soften it, that's something council can do. Thank you.
I don't feel comfortable doing that right now because it's probably taken from another version of the OCP. And if it's been taken from another version of the OCP, I'm not aware of it being a problem as of yet. I just wanted to flag that if staff had any concerns on that, when we start having language thou shalt not, if that's something that raises sort of like spider sense for staff. And let's see. The other thing too is where it says the town shall encourage the regional district of Nanaimo, this is second last, the penultimate one, to increase minimum parcel size for subdivision within the drainage areas of Granite Creek or Beach Creek. I'm just wondering, do we want to say increase the parcel size or maybe just stop building so much altogether? Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So at the time that this policy was integrated, it was a policy foundation for the town to discourage subdivisions in those upper areas of the creek and actually, where possible, like to consolidate or increase those minimum lot sizes. This is an old policy. So just for context, I think the regional district has increased a lot of the minimum lot sizes since this policy was originally implemented, which I believe was 98.
And I'm just saying this because what I see of a lot of new development in the RDN, it's 2-acre, 2.5-acre single-family home properties with a 3,500, 4,000 square foot house, and then a separate garage and a huge lawn, and it's very water intensive. For citizens, the city of Parksville in June of this year had an interim report on their water study. It's a $600,000 water study, so it's very detailed. And in one of the sections of it, it breaks down household consumption by different building typology. So an apartment uses roughly this much water on average. The sort of ranchers we have in Qualicum Beach on a fifth of an acre use roughly this much water. And then a large rural residential home uses roughly this much water. And it's roughly 4 or 5 times the apartment per household. So it's a huge water impact. So it's one of the concerns I have is just when we're looking at this policy, I personally prefer to see a lot less of those large single-family homes in the regional district, but I'm not sure. The mayor would probably be able to provide context where the RDN is right now with that, because that's the regional growth strategy and the RDN's planning documents, and I'm not qualified to speak to that. Then just the other thing, oh, sorry, Councillor Vanderbilt, my apologies.
So I'm just wondering, again, because we're running into a lot of points that are just directly from the old OCP and old policies, is there a way that we can sort of make it easier to deal with those at another time, or, you know, not have them take so much precedence in this OCP process? Is there a way that we can do that
Mr.
easily?
Sales, good point.
Yes, thank you. So I think coming out of this process, there will undoubtedly be some changes to areas of the OCP that we're not updating, that we're not able to get to right now. So we're going to put together a list of things that need to be considered in the next OCP review. And this is a practice that we do for other bylaws too, as housekeeping items are identified that need to be addressed. So it would be entirely up to council as to when to initiate that update. But as a result of this process, we will start that list and ensure that when you flag things, then we record them and they're considered in the next update.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
but
please do.
I'm just trying to simplify.
Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I have a couple that maybe we could flag. One is around liquid waste on page 52, and the town of Qualicum Beach produces 32% of the flow for liquid waste, so we pay accordingly. And I just think that infiltration should be something that should be on our radar, and managing that, because I think it would save in the long run. So I don't know if efficient use of the existing community sewer system, and then I would add something about infiltration, but that might come forward to a future one. I don't know if I can wordsmith it right now. The other one is on page 56. We're talking about stormwater and watershed management. And it talks, the town shall encourage on-site stormwater solutions where it is geotechnically feasible to do so. Are we past the stage of encouraging and now we should be requiring? I just wondered if that would be an issue to change
Mr.
that.
Sales.
Yes, thank you. The OCP could include that language to make it a hard requirement, but it would still not be a hard requirement just because of the nature of an official community plan, that it's not a regulatory tool. So if council wanted to advance that as a hard requirement, that thou shalt do that on all developments, that would be a separate bylaw, which would be more than happy to discuss what the process of developing that bylaw would be. But just to be clear, we could harden the language, but it wouldn't actually change the effectiveness of that clause. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, then to the point about the language, we had the same thing before. I'm just curious about the water policies, more for my benefit as an elected official on page 58. So where it says the town shall explore additional aquifer and surface water sources, and the town shall pursue water rights to an intake and monitoring station on the Low Qualicum River. And I know we're going to do the hydrogeological study starting next year. And I'm wondering, is this getting ahead of that study, or is this sort of consistent with past findings?
Thank you. To the best of my understanding, this has been a long-standing policy about encouraging alternative intake. And so this policy has been in the OCP for at least 25 years, maybe longer.
Well, I won't change it today because I don't have enough information to make that change. Okay, I did some due diligence on some of my concern about recycling, so it's actually moot. The only other thing, too, is for me on page 61, when we're looking at the DPAs, so the ones that we're talking about for RFC 1 and RFC 2, and the only thing I'm sort of being really picky about, and I apologize if I'm being super pedantic, because I know the legislation doesn't define intensive. It specifically leaves it to local governments. Intensive is whatever you think intensive is. But I just want to highlight, if we want to have DPAs that sort of, it's either multifamily or it's intensive, are the two only reasons you can have a strictly residential DPA. So I don't know if that should be reflected in the way they're worded, or it's probably just in the DPA. You could just identify that. But I just wanted to flag that because if we're going to have DPAs, we do want to make sure that they're lining up with the provincial legislation surrounding DPAs. And then, I'm sorry, this is just a huge section and there's a lot of things with nothing. A couple things which are just like typos. There's a couple typos in this section. I'll just let staff know later on. You guys have done an amazing amount of work. So the number of typos I found, I think, was just one hand for the whole document. So it's pretty darn good. It's much better than I could do. Just one question on page 67. So DPAs for ecological greenway access at the very bottom, when it's sort of talking about wetlands, and it says that recommended by a registered professional biologist. Just before the most recent election, there was a free informational session on all things wetlands put on by a local nonprofit. And what they basically said is that the wetlands inventory from the province is incomplete, right? So it gets a lot of things that are wetlands, but there's things that are wetlands that are not included in that inventory. And the way you determine if something is a wetland or not is actually you take soil samples. If there are certain biological chemicals in the ground which indicates a wetland, then it's a wetland. And it's not so much, I saw water in July, I saw a puddle in July, or there was this or that animal. So I'm just wondering, would a biologist be responsible for doing those soil samples, or would it be someone with a different designation?
Thank you. So a few years ago, before Bill 44 was introduced, the scope of this OCP review was going to specifically tackle these ecological development permit areas. And unfortunately, we didn't have the opportunity because there's a lot of ambiguity in here, I would say. in practice on the ground, often we're able to work around those ambiguities. But having said that, this section could be much clearer. And I do want to add as a side note that one of the real benefits now that we're moving the actual guidelines to the zoning bylaw is that council will have an opportunity to refine some of those ecological DP areas, the guidelines, without cracking open the OCP. So we're in a better position to make some refinements, but unfortunately we didn't have the capacity or the community engagement to support many major changes to this section.
Just because I'm scarred from the previous term when we were trying to do things at the South Airport lands, and then a lot of neighbors said, no, this is a wetland, and then it's just, if that, my understanding is correct, it was someone who actually has a background in that and was very well versed. Just so that people are clear on what the process would be to establish that, because it's entirely fair. If it is actually a wetland in terms of the soil composition, then it's a wetland and it's what it is. And then there's provincial legislation which protects it in perpetuity. So yeah, I just want to be clear on that so we didn't have confusion where someone said, but I saw this animal, and then they say, how dare you do this? And then it becomes, sorry, I just, the war wounds from the previous term. Let's see, light industrial 2. I just have a little question mark for airport potential. And I know when we initially did the East Village, the previous OCP was talking about how this will lead to a net loss of light industrial land, which does have specific use cases outside of commercial. And I'm wondering where we're at in terms of, because at that point it says, oh, well, we'll replace some of that with the airport, and assuming then there's no net loss of light industrial, this is reasonable. But we ran into a few hiccups with that. And I'm just sort of wondering, is there still an overarching desire to open up that conversation when we were looking at our airport plan in the future to look at light industrial uses? Ms. Varela.
Yeah, it could be, Chair, it could be a discussion. We do have that master plan / business plan on our radar for an outer year. Again, it was one of those initiatives that got moved out, but I would anticipate that would be the process you're referring to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's just more that to flag for the public, if they've read the previous OCP, they would see that light industrial reference to airport lands, and we're displacing some of our East Village light industrial to the airport, and then where that is. So I just wanted to flag that more than anything else. Okay, I'm almost done, I swear. And then, let's see, I have some notes which I can't really understand. Nope, I have no other notes on this section. So that's section 2 done then. So we're going to move on to section 3, which starts on, oh, sorry, Councillor Young, my apologies, sorry.
Sorry, just got a memo to myself that going to page 37 under policies of community health, 2.1.3.1, the town shall encourage Island Health to further utilize their land on Jones Street to improve health services in Qualicum Beach. I'd like to make a motion that council engages with Island Health to see what kind of immediate plans they can have for that location, whether it's something we can collaborate with them to. Given what's been brought to our radar, the needs for care beds, the need for medical services, all that, and that could be a great location at Eagle Park to have more care beds. And so, given also that in Nanaimo, when EB promised a cath lab and nothing has happened yet, the Nanaimo Hospital Foundation and the City of Nanaimo have fundraised to the point where they can build the cath lab in 3 years' time. So given that there is this land that is available that town gave to Island Health, we should be working with them now and not just letting them decide what they're going to do, because we constantly hear they have no money. So if we could have a conversation with them, collaborate with them, and see if we can work on a project that will be a benefit to our community, like care beds. So I'd like a motion on that.
I would suggest, just if I may, that perhaps this is a request to have someone as a delegation at a future in camera I'm just thinking VIHA probably wouldn't be too keen to talk to the public about potential future funding things, and they'd prefer it to be an in-camera discussion. But it's not totally germane to the OCP, if I understand what you're saying, because if you want us to have a sit-down chat with Island Health about how to utilize that site, that would probably be an in-camera delegation. And I don't mind, if staff are comfortable with that, we can entertain that now, or maybe after the OCP. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would suggest that it's a good discussion to have. I think it should be outside the context of the OCP review, because that is an action that would certainly be welcome to flow out of this policy, right? So it's completely aligned with this policy. We just need to have a meeting with them to see what their plans are. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think it would fundamentally change the wording of the OCP policy that's here. So I think that's more something that maybe, if Councillor Young wants to liaise with staff. We did have a sit-down meeting about a year ago at UBCM with VIHA, and we said we'd have a future meeting, and I know staff have been so slammed with everything. That hasn't quite happened yet, but one day, hopefully, and it would be good to have that conversation about what their long-term plans are in our community in the surrounding area. Because I do know there are several projects that are more Nanaimo focused. So there's long-term care in Lanceville, and that project is scheduled for 2029. A few things that Councillor Young just alluded to in Nanaimo hopefully get going. But yeah, I don't think it changes the OCP. So maybe let's just, is there anything else? Maybe any other issues? Because it's a reasonable request, just maybe not now.
Oh.
Sorry, Councillor Vanderbilt, my apologies.
That's fine. I think this has come forward in many different ways and shapes and forms previously. So as a policy in the OCP, I definitely think we should just leave it as is. The town shall encourage, and we have actually encouraged them. We just haven't really gotten any response from them. So I think as it sits right now is fine. And then if we want to take another attempt, then we could do that at a later point.
And I know the mayor's probably going to watch this at some point, so I'll point out I'm sure he's had that conversation several points since that land was allocated to VIHA, I believe roughly 20, 25 years ago. So with that, because I think we're all in agreement that the policy is fine as is, and then we'll take that offline perhaps. Councillor Young.
Prior to this, we've been wordsmithing, and so I think then I should be allowed to wordsmith on this. Shall encourage Island Health. Well, how long does it take to encourage someone? I mean, it's something that's of an urgent matter, and I'd like to have more immediate action, more immediate firm answers as to what's going on and how it can be with having a positive outcome from it all, and not just still for another year, having that land sitting empty.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you. Again, these are some things that perhaps the town doesn't have full control over, but what I could do is support the councillor in drafting a notice of motion that we could bring back to the table at a subsequent meeting, separate and apart. So I think if we can stay up with the policy level, then I'm happy to work offline to move those other items ahead that I know matter so much.
I agree, and I do think it'd be good too, when we're having that sit down, then we can hear what VIHA is looking to do and how can we support them with that. So it becomes a reciprocal thing as opposed to just us saying, fix stuff and do something, and then they'll say, we'll add it to the list. So I do think that'll hopefully be a fruitful conversation. I share your sense of urgency, but I think Ms. Farrell is quite correct that maybe a green sheet or a notice of motion in the meeting in 2 weeks' time would be the right place to place that. Is there anything further? Councillor Skipsey.
I don't know if I'm still in part two, but.
Sure.
Okay, I had a couple of questions about, well, it's actually, okay, page 68 talks about the Claymore forested wetland, and we list a bunch of the SEIs on that page, and I just wondered, I don't think they're shown on any of the maps, and I think it would be helpful perhaps to overlay the SEIs either on the park and ecological greenways or the ecological development permit areas maps. I don't, 2.4 or 2.7 of the schedules. And there's a piece of land that the town owns behind what was the Wilson property that's very wet. and it was, that was part of the reason why the town acquired it. And I wonder, I don't really see it on any of these maps. And I think that, I don't know if that can be added or not. Thank you.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So, as we mentioned earlier, the ecological greenways and all the development permit areas are significantly out of date. And in some of the atlases and mapping that they reference is 25 or 30 years old. So I wouldn't necessarily take the exact maps that are referenced here. When we have the opportunity to update this section, I would love to get a more current resource in there so that we could actually reflect it in the mapping, but it's quite out of date.
Councillor Skipsey, is that okay, or? Okay. Is there any further questions on section 2? Okay, so section 3, this is the village neighborhood section. This is going to be for the red numbers, pages 82 to 95. If you have the black numbers, which is just the OCP itself, it's 69 to 82, which is clear as mud. So 95. I'm trying to make this easy for Bernie, to Miss Ritter, to have little bookmarks for folks if there's specific sections they want to look at. And with that, how about I go from right to left this one time? So we're not starting with Councillor Skipsey every single time. Councillor Young, in that section, is there anything at this time? Okay. Councillor Van der Valk.
On page 83, diversity of housing, it talks about advance by encouraging a mix of high-quality housing types and encouraging accessory residential uses for commercial and cultural spaces within the village neighborhood. And I'm wondering what this means exactly, and do we have an example?
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for asking me the same question yesterday so I could have an answer today. It mentions residential with cultural spaces, and there isn't really a direct comparison. That language came directly from a previous OCP, but I think we need to look at it because I can't see how that would be applied to a cultural space to add residential to it. So thank you for pointing that out. I think that's something that we can address. And I also note that this clause, just as many other areas in the OCP, reference that high-quality housing, and I think that warrants an update as well. So you'll see 2 changes next time.
And I'd also point out, too, there used to be a zone where Naked Naturals, the bus garage site, which had a unique zoning, which was cultural, residential, commercial, I think is what it was called. Basically every use you can imagine. And that might be part of where that cultural, again, vestigial parts where this is part of previous OCPs. Councillor Van der Valk.
Page 85, 3.0.10. This is where there's reference to buildings should be a maximum of 3 stories in height, and then the case-by-case basis considerations. My question is, I understand the rationale for this. I don't necessarily agree. But how would you measure, on the case-by-case basis, how would you measure the extent of certain, I don't know what the word would be, but how do you propose measuring that? It doesn't really say that, the extent.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Van der Valk. It's a very good question, and it does say that consideration has to be given to those factors, and it's council that gives consideration to those factors. So there's not necessarily a clearly defined pass or no pass on these criteria, it's up to council to determine, whether consideration has yielded support or not support for something. So a building comes forward, it says you have to consider impact, or solar access and neighborhood impact. So what one person or another person considers to be acceptable might differ, but it's ultimately up to council. Thank you.
Councillor Vandervalk.
So there is no criteria in place then that says if you provide this, then you could get 1 story as opposed to 3 stories in addition. So it seems a little vague to me.
Mr. Sales, is there anything you want to add?
No, we'll just take that as a comment. Thank you.
I was just thinking the density bonusing policy doesn't specifically mention building height, it just says number of units if you do X, Y, Z. So there's sort of an analog, but it's not exactly to what Councillor Vandervalk is speaking to. My apologies. Councillor Vandervalk.
Thank you. Page 87. I was just curious, 3.1.5. Again, I'm not exactly sure what this is referring to, and if we have an example.
Mr. Sales, I think we need some bit of a Wayback Machine for town planning on this one.
Thank you, and I'd be pleased to provide that. There are examples where the zoning would permit a wide range of commercial uses, but a strata decides they don't want smelly restaurants, and so they prohibit something that the town would otherwise permit. So this language would give policy support to saying, you can't prohibit those things. We actually would like to have a restaurant here. So you may live upstairs and you may not like pizza, but we really want to have a mix of uses.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vandervalk.
Again, I think I'm in the previous decisions department, but on page 97, there is a reference to, on the bottom of the page, sustainable food systems, advanced by encouraging and facilitating small-scale market gardening on residential land. So I'm just wondering what that would look like exactly.
Before I transfer to Mr. Sales, I just point out that is section 4.
Oh, my apologies.
I'm not saying it's not a bad question, it's a great question, but it is section 4. Okay, we'll save it for a little bit, so Mr. Sales will be very well prepared for that response. Anything further on that section, Councillor Vandervalk?
I don't think so right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, I just had a couple comments. I don't really think there's any quick fixes or changes that will come out of it, but I do think our density bonuses, we need to revisit what it is that we reward and to make sure that they align with the values and objectives, goals of council. So for instance, like green housing, well, I think we're past incentivizing that. I think there's an expectation now that people would build to a certain standard and whatnot. So I think at some point maybe we'll have to look at those, what we do reward with density to make sure it's aligned. Also, like 3.1.4 on page 87, existing trees shall be retained where possible as part of the landscape requirements. It seems to me it never happens. So I know we say we should do that, but it realistically, it's not happening. So either I think we need to look at how we make it happen, or we don't list it as something that we aspire to, because it's not really happening. And then 3.1.6 talks about commercial uses, but I wonder, and goods and services and whatnot, and that reminds me of the sustainable economy study that's being done, and whether that's referenced anywhere in this OCP or whether we should be. It's something that's a work in progress, but I think it could actually inform some future planning and decisions. Thank you.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. To the last point, you raise a good point that it probably should be in the index of plans. We'll make sure that that's updated. Thank you.
Councillor Skipsey, back to you. Okay, one last check for Councillor Young. Anything news come up? Okay. So 1 point for me on page 84, 3.0, letter E, to facilitate the comprehensive redevelopment of the former School District 69 bus garage and adjoining areas around Tosh and next to the former elementary schools as Qualcomm Commons. And my question is just, right now, our current strategy as a town is to do a long-term lease for Qualcomm Commons. And if we do a long-term lease, do we then have the ability to do any sort of development on the site? Or are we just sort of caretakers of the property? Because ultimately the province has the final say on that. I'm just curious because I actually don't know the answer to that. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So in other examples where school districts have done long-term lease with, say, a regional district or municipality, they have been able to construct things on there, but it does depend somewhat on the lease conditions. So it remains to be seen, but as an example, there is a big rec facility on school district land in Courtenay, right? And that was a long-term lease. It was long enough that they could justify the investment and see the return. So that was constructed on school district land.
And that's just one concern I have is that, you know, if we're going to take on the liability of the old elementary school, it'd be lovely to have the ability to do some things that address both community needs and to get some revenue as well. Next would be on the next page, at the very top, 3.0.4. I just want to highlight, this is something that I don't think we're seeing yet. I just worry that sometimes there's an accretion of policy which can lead to outcomes we don't want. And I think, this is not a humble brag or meaning anything, but my father in his younger days, when he was a very young man, lived in Shaughnessy for a little bit. And I drive through Shaughnessy today, and it's all 8-foot hedges, and you can't see any of the houses, and it's very much, you get a sense that you're not wanted there. Not even sure if most of the houses are inhabited these days. So I just caution that when we're looking at some of our policies that we don't arrive at this place. I'm thinking more like the replacement tree numbers. It's just a flag. But I do think this is a good idea as a policy because I know certainly for most areas of town we don't have those large hedges, which are really, I find them deeply off-putting. And that's my rant for the day. Page 89, this is just one thing. We had it presented to council, and there was some information, and this is the final bus garage concept and design report, where we're discussing the public square. And one of the considerations was the life cycle of the membrane over the proposed underground parking, or whether or not we have underground parking. And I know that the initial report, I believe said a life cycle of 25 years. And then the remedy after 25 years is you have to tear out everything you've put in, redo it all, and put in a new membrane. So I'm not sure that would be efficacious. I'm just curious, where are we? Like, did we get confirmation on the life cycle of that membrane? I know there's like 2 years ago, and we've been doing so many things, so I'm not expecting an immediate answer. But if we are going to advance that plan, A, we need to sort out, are we doing the underground parking? And then B, we need to sort out, if we're doing underground parking, are we doing all the stuff on top of it? So Mr. Sales, if you may.
Yes, thank you. So the decision about whether to have the underground parking with the square on top or just the square has yet to be determined. So council has not decided that yet. This clause specifically only says that we want the public square. It doesn't mention anything about the parking underneath or not. So I think either way, this policy supports the general intention.
Thank you very much. Page 90, the same thing, 3.4.2 about primary medical care and multi-doctor versus primary care. Made the point before, and I'm sure just like a control F of the word doctor, and it'll be really easy to find that throughout the whole document. So not trying to create too much homework for you. I did have one question, sort of, I don't disagree with the decision council staff have made with this, but I do want to flag it for the public, just because it was a bit of a point of contention at the start of the previous term on page 94, where we're talking about the East Village. And what's absent now fun thing from my old days in university taking philosophy classes. Pay attention to what's not in the argument. So what's absent now is the mention of East Village development plan. So there used to be a mention of that in the older version of the OCP, and that was a point of contention for some citizens. And now I don't believe it's actually in this section anymore. I was wondering if staff want to speak to the rationale for that. I don't disagree with it. I just wanted to, be transparent with that.
Yes, thank you. So one of the decision points was to consider whether to bring the current operations building, like Public Works Yard, into the East Village. If the decision had been yes, incorporate that into the East Village, I think that policy about developing a plan or design guidelines would be warranted. But given that there's only one single property left in the East Village to develop, it would be a big process, all about one property. I think it'd be better to be responsive in that case. Thank you.
I'd also point out, too, that Councillor Skipsey's earlier motion would address that as well, because it mentions any neighborhood plan not currently identified. So it is something that could incorporate that if a future council wants to do that. Sorry, Councillor Vandervalk.
Yeah, just in following up on that, because I did have that question as well. But, and I know that there's only the one property, but because there were so many exceptions for the property that was built on, I wonder if we do need some actual guidelines, design guidelines, even for the remaining part, because it's pretty much free-floating right now, is my understanding. So even though there is just the one parcel, we may well need to have some kind of design guidelines for that one remaining parcel.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you. So there are design guidelines that currently apply to the remaining parcel. So it's not that they are absent of design guidelines. They are different design guidelines than apply to the uptown central commercial area, but there are design guidelines. And it's up to council to determine whether or not a development meets the design guidelines. I should also point out that the zoning on the one remaining parcel likely doesn't meet the needs of the current owner. So should a development come forward, it's going to be a zoning amendment anyway. So there's going to be an opportunity for a lot of discussion, about density, height, design. Everything's on the table when you're talking about zoning. So there's really almost no chance that someone's going to walk through the door and try to get a development permit without changing the zoning.
Just for the benefit of the public, I believe the existing design approval was done over a decade ago for essentially 3 stories with ground floor commercial. Councillor Vandervalk, anything further on that point? Okay. And it is entirely fair. If the majority of council wants to do that, we can absolutely do that. And with that, anything further from anyone else? Okay, we're moving on to section 4. We're getting there. So that starts on page 96 at the very bottom. And I apologize as I'm flipping through the pages to figure out where it ends. But we'll start there, and maybe Councillor Skipsey, if you'd like to go first. Waterfront. Oh. It goes all the way to the map schedules at 138.
Oh, wow. Okay. I did have a comment. I know the estate residential probably came directly from the current OCP. So, but I would love to see something around the coastal Douglas fir bioclimatic zone ecosystem, because that's really what that is, and the importance of that, given that most of that type of zone has been decimated on the east coast of Vancouver Island. I think it's mentioned other places, coastal Douglas fir, but it is important, I think. I had a comment around the small-scale residential on page 102, and whether it always has to be new. There was a conversation yesterday I attended as an observer at the OCP meeting, and there was talk about maybe the fact that it doesn't always have to be new. So can we allow larger homes to be divided into multiple units? Is that something that could be included or mentioned? Sort of thinking a little bit outside the box.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. I think that observation that using existing structures is a huge opportunity to advance affordability. So wherever possible, we should look at using things that already exist. And so, yes, that would be permitted in the zoning. It would also be supported in the OCP. So that is a possibility, splitting up existing houses into 1, 2, 3, or 4 dwelling units.
Councillor
Just
Skipsey?
following up, then, sometimes if you don't mention things, then people don't really think about it, so it might be worth including so that it gets people thinking outside the box. I had a question around green buildings. On page 103, we don't talk, there's no mention of EV chargers, solar, other things that might be considered more green. I also don't know, we talk about our zero carbon step code or any of the building codes, whether it's worth including. Got my thing. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
And I want to confess my negligence because there was one point about Section 3 that I forgot, and that was on the village neighborhood with the 2-unit requirement for new subdivisions. I just want to flag the reason I brought that forward initially was to avoid what I would call the Oak Bay Special, not anything about Miss Varela, but it's where you take a rancher from the 1970s, tear it down, and put up a giant home that just barely meets the site coverage and everything else, and it's for a nice, lovely retired couple. But basically, you're replacing a single-family home with a single-family home. So with that then, and I apologize to council, sorry, should have added in the last section. There's been a lot, and I'm trying to keep track of everything. But just wondering, would that be captured in the current policy, or does it only apply to new subdivisions? My apologies again for getting that.
Do you have the page number by any chance? Because I think that the reference is specific to subdivisions coming from zoning amendments.
I believe so. And
Okay.
I don't think we have to decide anything today. I just want to flag that because we are going to have second reading in the near future, and just sort of something where staff might want to be, in the next meeting we can talk about that because I don't want to drag this process down. Sorry, Mr. Sales, please.
So just to add, so if there's a future application for a zoning amendment in the village neighborhood, then at that time, staff would be referencing this policy to say, and we should have a requirement that there be a minimum of 2 dwelling units, because that's what the OCP says. So that's how that translates into actual requirements, is through a zoning amendment application.
I see what you mean. Thank you very much for clarifying. My apologies for interrupting. Councillor Skipsey, I believe you said you were good? Okay. Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I'll go back to my page 97 regarding small-scale market gardening. It's at the bottom of the page. On residential land. So I'm just wondering how this is envisioned in terms of how that would work.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So once again, winding up the Wayback Machine. At the time that this policy was added, there was a lot of interest from a few residents that wanted to grow vegetables on their residential parcel and sell them at the farmer's market. So that's very clearly something that's generally compatible with the town's food security goals, so council put it in as a policy to say that we would support it.
Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, there is quite a demand, I believe, and I think the demand will grow as there's more residents that don't have access to a garden space. Might there be an opportunity to try and coordinate people that have big lots that could have a garden on it with people that don't have a space but would like to? So that's just an aside. I don't think it needs to be included in the OCP, but it's an idea because I think we are always concerned about community gardens, and that might be an opportunity. Okay, page 99, 4.1.2. Let's see, what have I got here? Sorry?
Oh, so it's gardening again.
Sorry. I'm on the wrong page. Okay. Okay, yes, that's the same question. So, again, it does say the town shall encourage and facilitate. So I'm wondering about how we would facilitate that and whether we need to change that wording.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. We'll take that as a suggestion. It's possible we need to just remove "and facilitate" if that is ambiguous. Thank you.
Page 109. So in our objectives in 4.2C, to reduce the use of automobiles, particularly for daily needs, goods, and services, which I think is definitely a very valuable objective. I just wonder, I think there are a lot of people that live outside of Qualicum Beach, definitely outside of the core of Qualicum Beach, that are driving into town. Lots of people come and do their shopping here that don't necessarily live in town. So I don't know that that we really can do anything about that other than saying maybe electric vehicles and having all the things that we've done around electric vehicles. But again, that may well be out of our control in terms of an objective, simply because there's so many people that come into town from out of town.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, we'll look at that clause. It came from the sustainability plan, but we'll compare the previous wording to this one to make sure it's aligned. I would also note that there is a policy opening the door to neighborhood commercial, which was sort of the complement to this policy, saying, well, if they can't get to the commercial core, we can bring a little bit of commercial closer to them so they can meet some of their daily needs.
And so in the sustainability plan, it mentions a certain distance for walking for 90% of residential. And that's facilitated through commercial not exceeding 300 square meters. And then it is also in the small scale housing portion where it says we will entertain on a specific case-by-case basis. Again, it mentions, I believe, 300 meters squared total for the floor space of that proposed convenience store / small corner grocer, whatever it may be. But it is, just to Mr. Sales' point, it's in two places. Sorry, Councillor Vandervalk.
And again, on page 109, 4.2F, to identify land reserves that may serve as future sites for additional resort facilities. Where did the idea of the need for more resort facilities come from?
Mr. Sales.
The Wayback Machine is drawing a blank on that one. I think that's a really old policy. I'll have to go back and compare. Thank you.
I just say this was something I really flagged because it reeks of assistance to business. And the existing short-term rental study said we had 44 net units of hotel that need to be provided. And that is precisely the number that Pheasant Glen is proposed to build. So to Councillor Vandervalk's point, the answer is 0. So the idea of land reserves, especially for me, that strikes of town land reserves for resort accommodation, just makes my skin on end, let's just say. I'll leave it at that. Councillor Vandervalk, please.
So I guess I'll just flag that as a question then. And page 111, 4.3. Light industrial, the bottom line, the town should explore the feasibility of providing a forestry management and/or an industrial area on town-owned land. Again, I think this is the Back to the Future machine. So we'll just put that on the list of things that we didn't get a chance to deal with. That'll go, okay. And page 115. 4.5, in the second paragraph, the last line or the last bit of the line will become, well, I should probably read the whole thing. So Qualicum Beach offers opportunities for lifelong learning, including elementary schools and a high school. Milner Gardens, Vancouver Island University, and adult education courses will become increasingly important as Qualicum Beach becomes a more complete community. And my question is, do we consider that Qualicum Beach is not a complete community?
Mr. Sales, and be very careful how you answer.
Thank you. Well, I would just say that that wording was directly from the old OCP. There's been no change to that.
I would say it's very difficult for staff to come up with a direct answer for that. I think it's very much in the eye of the beholder. But it's a good point to raise, Councillor Vandervalk.
Okay, well, I seem to be in the old department here. I'll take a break. Give somebody else a chance. Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Frella.
Chair, we've been at it for a little bit here, and this is intensive work. Perhaps we could have a 5-minute recess just to allow people to stretch, take a breath.
And for Mr. Sales to get a glass of water. By the way, great job so far to our staff. There's a lot of questions just coming out of the blue. Literally, probably, we're getting close to the high dozens to low 100. So yeah, great job so far. And motion to recess would be appropriate. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vandervalk, all in favor? We're adjourned for 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm not used to having to bang a gavel. I think we were still with Councillor no, Councillor Vandervalk had passed. Okay, but I think we haven't gone to Councillor Young yet. Oh, okay. So Councillor Skipsey then, right, please.
Okay. So I'm on page 118, 119, and it's with regard to rural land. And I just would love to see that instead of just advanced by preserving and protecting agricultural land resources for present and future food production, I would just love to see more people using their land for food production, and how do we ensure that it's not just protecting it, but it's actually utilizing it and making it happen. So that's one thing that I think is really important. We do have a lot of rural and ALR lands in our town, and I don't know whether that's through taxation or what tools are in our toolbox, but I'd love to see that coming forward at some point. Also under page 121, 4.6.11, and it says that in order to promote and encourage the retention of large rural holdings, the town shall not support the reduction of minimum parcel sizes for rural designated lands unless the rural form and character of the lands are secured, and the proposal significantly advances at least one of the OCP goals. And I'm just a little concerned that it's just one of the goals. I think that's maybe a little light. When I look at the OCP consistency worksheet, I could say, let's say it's going to be the community health, so it's going to foster the health and well-being of the people that live, work, play, and invest in the town. And then you could change your land. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I don't know if staff have any comment.
Mr. Sales, if you could please.
Yes, thank you. So this flowed from a decision point that council made in terms of the non-ALR land on the south side of Rupert Road. So what we're trying to accommodate is a way to allow for, say, the subdivision of that garden center and consideration of a potential alternative use without actually extending the whole urban containment boundary that way, because the intention is not urban development. It's just a rural form with a slightly smaller parcel size than what's there. So that's the intention of this. If council, maybe not like wordsmithing on the fly, but if there is a better way to word this to clarify that intention, I think there's always room for improvement. But this is intended to open the door to, essentially parceling off something so it can be used for its intended, semi-rural purpose. And then at the same time, those other houses, which are two homes per lot, and in a very awkward strata situation, this would also potentially allow them to submit a zoning amendment for council consideration to separate it so that they can improve their housing situation. So that's the foundation. That's what it's supposed to achieve. But if there's a better way to word it, we're open to any suggestions. Thank you.
Just one thing, too, before I go to you, Councillor Skipsey, because I'm sure you have a great point. I would point out, too, that an OCP amendment by a proponent for a specific property is still a tool in our toolbox. So if we're worried about too broad language in our OCP, we can restrict the OCP language, but still have an OCP amendment come forward for the subject property, which might actually be more amenable to their desired outcomes, because it doesn't have to fit the sort of small box we're trying to create. It can be more site-specific, so it might be better for both Councillor Skipsey's concern and then for the proponent, because I know the project we're all talking about, I would be shocked if the public hearing was anything other than get on with it already. I could be wrong. I don't want to presuppose, but just to Councillor Skipsey's point that if you don't want to create an opening for one specific project, maybe the answer is just do an OCP amendment for that specific project. And then that way you can get the best of both worlds. But sorry, Councillor Skipsey, I interrupted you. My apologies.
No, I'm in agreement with what you're saying. I think that it's a bit too broad, and there may be unintended consequences from this. And I guess my only other question was, like, are we talking about a minimum parcel size or anything like that, if that would be helpful? But I think maybe to your point, maybe it would be better to leave it outside as just the one specific site.
And I think, too, I think there's going to be some wordsmithing on this over the next little while, so I don't think we have to propose amendments just yet, but I do think it's fair that staff have this flagged. And I think this is also, too, when the mayor comes back as well, we can have a debate at council at 5, hopefully, in the near future, because I think there's a way we can get the best of both worlds and both satisfy your concerns, which I think are legitimate, and I do agree. If you say any of our objectives in our OCP is met, you can rezone your rural property. Well, there's a lot of objectives in our OCP. So I do want to highlight that there's ways we can address this. I'm not sure the best way yet, but I'm sure there'll be some fruitful email exchanges in the next little while. So back to you. Oh, sorry, Mr. Sales.
Thank you. In rereading this and, once again, just trying to improve the wording, the actual decision point that council made specifically referred to the non-ALR parcels on the south side of Rupert Road. So maybe we can kind of tighten the geographical scope of it, because it was never in council's intention to apply this town-wide. And now rereading the policy, I can see how that could be perceived in that way. So thank you for flagging it. We'll look at it. Thank you.
Great. Anything further? Okay. Councillor Young.
Okay, that we want to encourage agricultural land for food production. Is there any way that we can approach the Agricultural Land Commission to see if they can incentivize that for the farm people?
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So that's a good suggestion. I think that would be a good UBCM or ABICC amendment or a proposal to bring forward. It's not necessarily something that the OCB can tackle. Thank you.
And just for council's benefit, about 3 years ago, I attended a meeting with the ALC in attendance at Merville, and it was listening to a bunch of farmers, and I was basically going to bat for the Rusted Drake. Some of the concerns from farmers are the number of buildings available to build on site. Usually it's for like grandparents to move into, and the grandparents look after the kids while the parents are out farming on the land. And then for a while there's some restrictions on that. And then as far as incentives, that's probably more provincial policy, which is a reasonable conversation. A lot of folks know that the smaller family farms have a hard time financially, but I'm not sure where that would be in the province's list of priorities, but there's no harm in crafting a ABICC resolution and it gets to UBCM next year. Anything further, Councillor Young?
just if anyone's handy at letter writing, if someone could just write a letter, we don't have to wait for a conference and, resolutions, and that just takes, more time.
Oh, Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Chair. Again, we could structure that as a notice of motion to be brought forward to council because it would have to be a direction of council.
Fair enough. Good point. Unless a member of council wants to do it on their own as their own little email to the Ministry of Agriculture, or Ministry of Agriculture oversees the ALC, or I guess it'd be Treasury would be finance for funding for things. But to Ms. Varela's point, if you want to have a little bit more oomph, it would probably have to be a direction of council. Anything further, Councillor Young? Okay, so section 4, which is, sorry, Councillor Vandervalk, my apologies, I didn't see you.
Okay. So I just wanted to mention that a couple of either the AVICC or UBCM, I have attended workshops that were directly involved with farming and sustainability and food security, and I actually am planning to be able to bring forward a notice of motion for our next council meeting involving this. So I don't think both of us need to do it, but just so you know that I am going to do that.
Okay, good information. And also, I have no idea. There might be dueling notices of motion, or there might be collaboration. That's not my role to say. Anything further from other members of council on section 4? Okay. Sorry, Councillor Vandervalk.
All right. I have to do my handout here so you can see me, I guess. That's okay. On page 126, and I have a feeling this again is you've seen it before, or it's been here before. On the very bottom of page 126, talking about the waterfront plan and existing washrooms should remain at the central area of the beach. New public washroom facilities should be considered at the foot of Memorial Avenue and Seaside Nature Park. So my question is, I believe that the visitor center, there has been funding slotted for new washrooms. I did speak with Mr. Hare about this, and it is grant dependent, but I wonder if there's anything further that the town plans to do. There was a $500,000 placeholder for this, grant dependent. So I don't know if this is something that came directly out of the last OCP, or if we should be discussing this at this point.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So this is an older policy. It predates the acquisition of Sotlam Park, which is why Sotlam Park is not listed as a potential washroom location. So I think it's fair to say that this policy is aspirational, and it's only going to be advanced if council puts resources behind it. So if council does want to see washrooms at Seaside Nature Park, for example, that would be a considerable investment, and it would have to be put into a budget year through the financial planning process. This policy is just aspirational, and it's directly from a previous OCP.
And when we were doing Sotlam Park, I believe there was some debate that this was sort of considered in lieu of the Seaside Nature Park washroom at the time. But Councillor Vandervalk, I thought you have more to add? Okay, please.
Yeah. Well, just that the visitor center, Chamber of Commerce was going to be renovating the visitor center, and that's why we allotted that $500,000 in 2024, I think, but nothing has happened, so I'm just not quite sure where it's at. But I do have some other questions. On page 132, let's see. It's just talking about actually page 130. And again, this is the waterfront, so I'm not sure if that's applicable. but talking about in 4.7.10, talking about anchoring buoys in partnership with the private sector to encourage marine use. So what is that referring to specifically?
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So when this policy was added, the idea was that maybe we will never have a marina, but maybe there'd be some sort of a mooring system where people could be shuttled out to mooring buoys from one of the hotels. It's an older policy, but that was the intention at the time. Thank you.
Councillor Vandervelde.
Thank you. And page 164, or is that past the, am I past the? I am
think that's going
past.
past.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, I think that's about it for now. Thank you.
Okay. Any last comments from other members of council on this section? Okay. Let's see, some things which are, that's just more a comment, so it's no need. I do apologize. I wanted to be more prepared, and I didn't realize just how big this document was. I would note, too, that's page 107. So we did have the council resolution about amending the urban containment boundary in West Qualicum Beach, but 4.1.3.2 is the vestigial remains of that idea of the West Qualicum Beach cluster development. So it's 107 of our agenda. So it's just the second one. We're saying rezoning applications that cluster existing density may be considered outside the village neighborhood. And this was, I'm guessing, Mr. Sales can correct me if I'm wrong, it predates my time on council, but I think it was something like a small grouping of tiny homes potentially in a more rural setting. And maybe just correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So that policy would potentially have an impact on what would have happened in West Qualicum Beach, but it could apply to a more traditional single detached area where, like you said, a developer might say, I don't really want to build the 10 detached lots that are proposed or that are permitted in the zoning. I would rather take all of that density and combine it into one building or one set of tiny homes or something. So it allows council a foundation to say, we can consider clustering that density to preserve open space or whatever amenity else exists on the site. So it's still relevant.
Thank you very much. Just because some folks were, I remember some people were very keen on that whole West Qualicum Beach development, and what is that? Let's see. The other thing, too, for me, this is maybe more the extension on page 108 of the short-term rental. So we basically said, with short-term rentals, let's deal with it in the next council term. We've got a full dance card, essentially, for our planning staff. I just want to highlight, maybe for the public benefit, that I've had exactly one campaign volunteer. It's a guy who lives in town right by Qualicum Commons, and he's trying to do everything right, so he put solar panels on his roof. He's trying to be a good citizen, and he and his wife developed a tiny little room for Airbnb in their property, so it's in their house, and then that's something that they're not allowed to do because it's too small to qualify for a bed and breakfast. It's too small to qualify as a rental unit. And it's just sort of now a redeveloped space they spend a lot of money on and they can't use. So just as we start thinking about Airbnb, there might be some use cases where there's no net loss to the community from either the rental stock or doesn't qualify for a bed and breakfast under the existing regulations. And then there might be a way to create a little bit of tourism revenue. But that's, again, that's for future policy decisions. It's not really an OCP debate because that will be a separate short-term rental policy, which I think we'll be developing in the future. So I don't think it's appropriate to really wordsmith that in any way. Just wanted to flag that there are probably in our community some interesting use cases where if we're a little bit more flexible, there's no net loss. But I'm not sure how many there are. Let's see. Again, I flagged the resort facilities that Councillor Vandervalk had. Really not comfortable with that. Let's see. The other thing, 4.2.1, this is something where we haven't made this mistake so far on page 109, but in previous council there have been sometimes in our downtown core, the commercial area, where you have a residential development on the ground floor level. There's a few of them. It's more towards a community park, and it does sort of interrupt that continual flow of pedestrians. So I did note too, let's see, sorry, I'm looking at my handwritten notes. I think there might be something, I'll go offline with this. I'm having a hard time reading my notes about a potential conflict between the next two policies, but I'm not sure what the point was at this time. Sorry, it was late last night. And then just 4.2.7 on page 110, where it says the PQBTA will work on a destination tourism strategy. My understanding is they have that strategy. So do we need to have a separate policy for that? Mr. Sales?
That's a good catch. Thank you. We'll remove that policy.
It's basically redundant. Just for the benefit of council, they do have their own standalone policy developed with extensive consultation with town staff and the community. So there's really no point in us developing our own. Then 4.3, light industrial. This is something I remember seeing Global News talk about the erasure of light industrial in Vancouver and how it's creating a lot of headaches now because residential was so desirable, they got rid of all their light industrial. Now they found, actually, this is creating a bit of a headache for us because I know things like the car wash, it might sound silly, but having to drive to Parksville to get your car wash done, not every person is going to be able to actually physically wash their car in our community. So I just be cautious when we're looking at development in the East Village area that we don't utilize all of our light industrial for essentially commercial residential, an extension of the downtown core. I think staff are aware of that, but yeah. Next, page 100. I'm not sure about, this is sort of tangential to what Councillor Vandervalk, I believe, was talking to about forestry uses. And I know Councillor Skipsey gave me some background during the recess. But where it says talking about encouraging silviculture in 4.4B, and also to 4.4D, to protect the adjacent residential area by controlling the noise impact of any new developments in the airport mixed-use area. I just think that there's a lot of potential for some innovative uses. I know we were talking about electric car courier company in the previous term on the airport lands. So I'm just a little bit cautious on 4.4D because I know it was probably stemming from potential relocating the school's bus garage to the airport lands, and we wanted to create a buffer between that and Chartwell, so we wouldn't have cars warming up at 6 a.m. and disturbing the neighbors. But that might be something where we have a discussion about if we are going to engage the airport area with a broader mix of uses, potentially, is that regulation going to get in the way of a potential investment in the future? And I don't know. I'm just flagging that as a potential concern. I don't have a hard answer for that. Let's see. That's an offline point. Okay. Then 4.5C, to provide a limited amount of land for care facilities to meet some of the town's needs. My understanding is we've given land to VIHA, and then outside of that, it would be private sector. So is the intent then that the town should have a policy where we offer town land to potential private sector investment?
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. I'm not sure where that specific policy would. I'd have to go back through the evolving policies from previous OCPs. Thank you.
No problem at all. There's a few other points where I mentioned the order, but as Ms. Varela noted, the order is not a list of how important things are and how special they are. It's just an order. So I don't want to belabor that point because that's more grandstanding than anything else. On page 120, 4.6.5 is the Eagle Crest, sorry, not the Eagle Crest, the Pheasant Glen, wrong golf course. There's been a lot of Eagle Crests lately. But Pheasant Glen, so it talks about the Destination Golf Resort of Pheasant Glen. Is that policy still necessary now that they basically have all their approvals in place?
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. I don't think it's necessary. We left it in as sort of an Easter egg, so if someone tried to figure out how it exists outside the urban containment boundary, because when it was originally approved, it was only allowed outside the urban containment boundary because it was a destination resort. Now, having said that, if council and/or the public find that, vestigial clause to be confusing, we can remove it.
No, I think it's fine. I don't think we need to edit that. And then just on the waterfront, there's a couple things. One in terms of the naturalized foreshore and shoreline protection, 4.7.1. I think this is maybe just me with my interpretation of the waterfront master plan. We're talking right now about retention of trees, and it's probably more for the public areas, which is the parking spaces, and then there's very large existing trees. And as their root systems might be undermined in the future, the concern is, well, what do we do with these old trees? But my take on the waterfront master plan is really it was about foreshore enhancement and having softer solutions for the foreshore to enhance biodiversity. I know it's sort of referred to here, and it is sort of referred to in the sustainability plan that Councillor Skipsey sort of suggested that maybe we don't do the deep dive on the sustainability plan just yet. So I just wanted to note that. I'm not sure if it needs to be in this policy, if it's basically covered A, in the waterfront master plan itself, and B, in the sustainability plan, but I just wanted to flag that for this section. And then 4.72, just because I'm technically the chair of the accessibility committee, this is something where for the waterfront, there's a policy in a bit on page 129. Yeah, let's go to 129, that's much better. So this is the policies for the waterfront. And one thing for me is with the accessibility isn't really mentioned. I do want to flag that we had discussions about enhancing accessibility for the foreshore for folks with accessibility needs. I know both Councillor Skipsey and I were very keen, even if it didn't quite pan out the way we hoped. But I would suggest that there might be a letter Q, and I do have wording with me right now, or I might just email it to staff at a future date. But it would just be to enhance accessibility for citizens and visitors with limited mobility when possible or where possible. And the idea is that we're not obliged to make everything perfectly accessible, but we do a fair effort. I would note too, under the Accessibility Act, there is provincial legislation saying that town-owned facilities are required to meet an accessibility threshold now. I believe. I think it's now a positive requirement on us. So I probably align with that provincial legislation, but I don't have the exact wording, which is why I'm not doing a motion, because it's probably going to be an email to staff, and then we'll have some back and forth and check with the provincial legislation to make sure it's compliant, because, again, I don't want to suggest new capital spends that are coming out of the blue for the entire waterfront or redo our entire plan, which we just put out a grant for. But I just want to highlight, too, that there is this provincial legislation undergirding enhanced accessibility for town buildings. Unless members of council feel really strongly we need to do that now, I don't think it's necessary. Okay. Yeah, and we're going to be doing second reading in short order, and that's something I'll just send an email to staff and we can follow up on that. Almost done, I swear. I'm so sorry that this is the way we're doing it. Also, too, there's some mention on page 136, which is 4.9.5 of the ENN Railway. And I'm not sure, because right now, the existing documentation for the ENN Railway in our OCP talks a lot about protecting the corridor, which I do agree with, but there's not a lot of discussions about utilization of that space in any way. And we haven't, as a council, really made a decision from my recollection, and I'm seeing a shake of the head from Councillor Skipsey, so I'm assuming I'm not making this up. We haven't really made a decision about what the long-term use case should be, but I know that we've had a lot of delegations about trail use and other things, but I'm assuming that would just be a future discussion. I don't think that this should necessarily be a OCP decision just yet, because I don't think we've had council really weigh in on that, so. Okay, I just want to make sure I hadn't, forgive me again, missed that. And that takes us to the very end. So that is the end of section 4, unless anyone has any other last second section 4 concerns. With that, a motion, yes, Councillor Skipsey. To go beyond, Councillor Skipsey, a motion to go beyond 3 hours, as we're at exactly 3 hours. Councillor Vandervalk seconding, all those in favor? Passes unanimously, thanks so much. There's 1 or 2 typos with the map schedules, which are just honest typos. So I had a little fun phone call with a citizen who sort of chuckled about something, where the term helicopter parenting is about to become very literal if we don't change the colors. Right by KSS, there's a little thing for airport land use. It's the wrong color, pink and purple, so. But that's not a big deal. You guys are working incredibly hard. And now for the consistency worksheets. Is there anything for this sort of section, which is essentially attachment 1, I believe, and it goes through all these policies and the congruencies with the regional growth strategy? Any concerns from council? Anything? Going once. Okay. With that, let's go on to attachment 2. This is zoning bylaw number 900 and the DPAs. So this is going to be the development permit guidelines. So is there any questions on this section of the attachments? So this would be starting at page 159. And there's a whole bunch of wording here. I thought I had some notes. Councillor Skipsey.
Can I just ask if these were taken directly from previous documents, or if there was quite a few changes? Thank you.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So all the C development permit areas were taken directly from the previous schedules. There were, again, the ecological areas and the hazardous lands area also directly from the previous. So that simplifies things somewhat. There used to be some multifamily residential development permit areas that were in the previous map, and most of them were eliminated and replaced with new development permit areas, and there's a few reasons why. First, most of those areas were developed already. So for example, the Bluffs was a development permit area. Not really relevant anymore because it's built out. So that is now within the same area as everything else, which is the small scale residential form and character guidelines that apply when you're building multiple units. And also we have a new development permit area, which is the residential form and character guidelines, or form and character 2, which is intended to apply to developments where you're at a density of more than 5 units per parcel. And so that applies to the new parcels in Eagle Crest where there's that multifamily development potential. So in essence, the only new areas that you're seeing on this are the small scale residential form and character and the medium density residential form and character.
Any questions from any members of council? I just have a couple little brief notes. Okay, so seeing none, on 164, there's just a conflict with our existing tree bylaw where it says 1 tree has to be replaced for every tree removed. But then 165 is the one where I do think there's actually a philosophical conversation. So it's the second point on partial relaxation of related land use regulations. So this is where there's maybe a riparian area or some other water-related feature that you want to protect, and then we say, well, we allow you to reduce your setbacks by this much %. And my question is just, do we want to have set percentages? Because in my view, if it wasn't god-awful ugly, because I'm thinking these would be much larger lots that are more rural in nature, and they wanted to situate their house as far away as humanly possible from a sensitive riparian area, that would actually probably be in our interest. So would this then prevent them from doing so and force them to move closer to the more sensitive area?
Thank you, Councilor Harrison. 2 answers. One is this section really needs work, so we'll put that on the to-do list. But secondly, in a scenario where there's a more logical location for a house that doesn't meet these to the detail, you can always do a variance. So that tool will always be available to council if there's a more logical location.
Thanks. I would hope a future council would approve a location that's more ecologically sensitive and beneficial to the sensitive areas. I think that was it for this entire section for attachment 2. There was one thing, 173, again, back to the waterfront. So that's the waterfront master plan, and we were talking about the foreshore solutions, and it has the verbiage may be. And I'm just wondering, with the waterfront master plan, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Is this something where we're starting to set harder requirements or any additional impediments? Or is it just, gosh, we'd like it if you do something more natural as a foreshore solution, but it's perfectly fine if you want to keep your riprap or your seawall?
Thank you, Councilor Harrison. So this development permit area is relatively simple in the way it's laid out, and doesn't have the wording of a regulatory system, but it has been effective since 2016. We haven't seen any hard walls go in, so it is doing pretty well. I would note that there's some provincial legislation currently going through the system that would require us to update this section and be more specific. So I would say stay tuned. It's served us so far very well, but because the province is continually introducing more things, well, surprise, we may have something else new next year. Thank you.
And I would have put too, in the previous term, Mr. Sales and I were part of a Green Shores working group where the provincial and federal governments actually started working together on Green Shores. It was a really wonderful moment. Next is page 185, the very, very bottom, the last bullet point at the very bottom. This is for commercial and industrial form and character. And this was used in the previous term in the commercial core of our downtown on a development on First Avenue, where it says ground floor dwelling units must be adaptable to future commercial uses. And I do think we want, I'm not suggesting an amendment, but I do think we want to make sure we're very clear that right now, it's way more, if you're a developer, the feedback I've heard from people who build things is that ground floor residential is a lot easier to sell and a lot easier to deal with than ground floor commercial. And so if you're a proponent building something, you'll want it to be all residential. And then you have the commercial area where generally our OCP says thou shalt do ground floor commercial with a bunch of residential developments in the middle. So I just want to make sure, do we want to keep that in here or do we want to have that debate? I'm not sure how council feels. This is a leftover from the previous council's term where we allowed it for one development and then it sort of became part of a verbiage. Councillor Skipsey?
Well, I think there is somewhere that says that ground floor units, especially street facing, must be commercial and you can have residential in the back. But I think it kind of conflicts with what's being said here.
You're correct. There is another section which does specify street-facing properties have to be commercial on the ground floor. So I do think that's something maybe we should just flag for now, and maybe at a future meeting. I don't know whether there's a separate. Oh, sorry, Mr. Scales.
Oh, if you could just clarify the page, just so we make sure we catch that.
185 at the very, very bottom of 185 for the commercial and industrial form and character. In the agenda, sorry, and it's 27 of attachment 2. But yeah, Councillor Skipsey is correct. There's a bit of a conflict there, and I just want to make sure if we're going to keep this on the books, we're clear on the intent. This is what we want to do. That's all. And I think this is, that's going to be the WHAM stuff. I do think too, sorry, lastly is beach commercial. So I'm not sure how much is in the works for beach commercial, but be that as it may, just on page 187 now for a red 29 of attachment 2. Some of the things, the scale and setback of buildings shall not detract from the broad view of the beach. Design shall generally complement views of the beach, ocean, and mountains rather than trying to compete with them for attention. And I understand the intent, but at the same time, what exactly is compete with them for attention? Is it building form? Is it a giant neon sign with incandescent lights pointing somewhere? What is the sort of rubric for that?
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. That wording predates, well, probably everyone in the room. I don't know the answer to that question, so, but it's very cute wording, isn't it? Thank you.
We hate competition in this town. Okay. And then some of the stuff for beach commercial also ties into the WHAM stuff. So when it says the architectural style of buildings and layout of the site shall be compatible with the scale and character of the existing cottage-type buildings in the area. This is C4, so this is around Ds. So I think when we start saying cottage-style design, I'm not sure where we are economically with that. If that's still economically viable in the 21st century, just with construction costs, materials costs, and everything else. But I'm not saying we change anything with that, just out of hand, but just want to flag, if someone wanted to build something that is a commercial-oriented beach development, it probably won't be cottages anymore. It's probably going to be a bulkier building that looks more like a hotel or a motel. And then, College Road. Sorry, my apologies, 189. So this is the Tudor style of the building. I know we had an application where this wasn't really an issue, so I'm not sure how much we have to belabor this. But things where it says the scale and location of such a building shall be discreetly integrated so as to not distract from nor cause obstruction to the original building. What original building? It's been gone for about half a decade, so just a little edit there.
Thank you. A few other people have pointed that out, and we'll clarify that.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to know I'm not the first. And then let's see, also too, for 193, we're now into the Berwick Road development area. Just with the second checkpoint for the guidelines, where it says development shall be at the scale to complement the existing village scale and character. And in this area, I think this is where you have, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is like Qualicum Manor might be in this development permit area. I think there's a patio home development as well. So I'm just curious, I can't, sorry, I should actually have the picture in front of me of where C9 is. I think it's one of these map schedules. But if it already includes essentially what's a multifamily long-term care facility, I'm just curious about, should we have the language about village scale? I sort of go back to a more small town scale. And again, the same language for the next one with massive building components, because we're in economic reality now where if you're going to do long-term care, you kind of need to have a bit of a bulkier building than maybe 30 years ago. But I think that's probably a bit self-evident. The last thing on lighting, there's a lot of language here about high-intensity fixtures and avoiding that. And I don't know if LED lights classify as high intensity, because that's conflicting then essentially with energy-saving guidelines. And the other fun fact, we was watching Global News, and someone just mentioned in a news report that the average 65-year-old requires 3 times as much light to see at night as the average 20-year-old. So sometimes a little bit more light makes sure that seniors can actually drive around a bit more. And then, let's see, we have some stuff in Chartwell for ENN. 195, I'm so sorry to do this. I promise I won't do this at the next meeting. 195 Highly Bluff Commercial, and it just says designs, the second bullet point here, the second check mark, is design shall be stepped with the slope of the bluff. And I'm wondering, because we had a proposal for a bluff area where it actually says it's from a geotechnical perspective when the building's done, it's better if the building is actually part of the slope. And I'm curious, is this best practices from a geotechnical perspective, or is this sort of a remain from an earlier date? And I don't have the professional expertise to say which. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So this is in reference to the site, at one point known as Crystal Terrace or Lasqueti View in a later iteration. And the geotechnical design originally for the Crystal Terrace version of it was that it would be stepped, and that was the recommendation of the geotech. However, that's a very expensive way to build, and so maybe that's why it never got built. I don't know. But the current iteration of development didn't take the same approach, which was, they didn't lay the building on the slope, I guess you could say, because of the cost and complexity of doing that. So the design intent, I think, is still important, because really what it speaks to is the street presence and seeing that kind of like layering or compatibility with the slope. So whether or not it actually lays on the slope is a design detail, and that would have to be worked out with a future geotech.
That's fair, and the site does need updated geotechnical data because the neighbors are quite concerned, and justifiably so. And I think that's everything. I'm pretty sure, yes, that is everything. Okay. Is there anything, Councillor Van der Valk?
I did have a question or two. On page 193, on the, again, Berwick Road, the guidelines, it's point number 4 that I have a question about. So structures of more than 2 stories height should utilize design methods that will substantially reduce the massing of the buildings. For example, stepping or incorporating the upper floors into a roof design. So I'm just wondering, not necessarily specific to this development permit area, but is there a way, excuse me, I'm going to cough. Is there a way to incorporate this into other designs? Because and specifically, I'm thinking about Eagle Crest. If we have the idea that perhaps if it's more floors than people would like, maybe then we have a restriction or a suggestion that those floors could be incorporated into a roof design. So I just thought that that was a point of interest for me anyways, in terms of design alternatives to reduce the height of buildings. So it's just a comment more than anything else.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. Noted.
That was brief.
Thank you so much. On page 196, point number 2, on the guidelines, the checkpoint number 2, architectural building design and site layout should leave no doubt that the development is a rural destination resort and should not emulate the appearance or feeling of an urban residential subdivision, townhome, or multifamily development. I'm not quite clear on why that's there, and perhaps you could enlighten me.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. That language came directly from the approvals when Pheasant Glen was approved. So the intention of that writing I can't clearly speak to, but I think my understanding is they wanted to make sure that it didn't just become a conventional subdivision or conventional development, that it had a resort feel.
Thank you. And just one other point, which isn't really, I didn't find it anywhere, but there was lighting that was talked about. And I'm just wondering on the waterfront where I know around the roundabout, we have to have certain levels of lighting. But is there a way to maybe ask the Shell service station if they have to leave their lights on full blast all night? And if there's anything we could do about that, because it is a bit much on the waterfront in the evening. So that's just a comment.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So CAO Varela mentioned a few times earlier that some of these that aren't strictly OCP related could be the topic of notices of motion. So that might be a good one also to prepare for a future meeting.
It's my time to say there's a future resolution about lights. But I would also highlight too for that section, I believe there was a discussion of vagrancy and disorder in the late night and how light doesn't impact that. It's only a police presence which impacts that. And I would note in the summertime this year, I went to see the F1 movie with Brad Pitt, and I went to see the late showing. So I got back at around 1:30, and I decided to drive by the waterfront, and I counted about 15 cars that were pretty clearly not at a hotel. It spikes in the summertime, obviously, but we are seeing on the waterfront. I've had several complaints from citizens about people who are now on the waterfront year-round on public property near their house. So just want to flag that. I'm not sure lighting is the answer. I'm just suggesting that this is going to be a going concern. In the last point in time count, roughly half the folks who are homeless are in cars. I do recall too, one last thing for 194, sorry. It's speaking of things from yesterday, it's the airport land use, saying there has to be that 30-meter buffer. And since the discussion of council is for a more specific residential use, I'm not sure we still need that 30-meter buffer. So this is the second last buffer area, shall be maintained adjacent to the EN railway in order to provide visual screening and noise abatement. And I'm just curious if we go, because this was originally, again, it was supposed to be the school bus garage relocation site, and there was concern about the noise of all the buses early in the morning, which was reasonable. But now that we're not doing that, I'm not sure if this policy still applies for residential use. Mr. Sales.
Thank you. I think we'll look at that policy. It likely should still be applied for light industrial uses, potentially, but I think we'll freshen up that policy because that has not been changed since the last version, but I think it warrants another look. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Village design guidelines? No? Okay. And forgive me, I'm at a bit of a loss as I kind of go through all the village design guidelines and go to attachment number 3. Attachment 3 is, sorry, I think it starts on page 256. And this is proposed goals for the OCP. Not sure if anyone has anything, sort of a reiteration of what we've already discussed today. So that goes to page 265 on the red numbers on your bottom of your page. Attachment 4, there really shouldn't be anything. This is just telling us what we voted on and what we did. So I don't think there should be anything. That takes you to 271. And then the interim sustainability plan. And Councillor Skipsey, you had a comment you'd like to make.
I just had a question of staff, because we've dealt with so many things here today. I wondered if receipt of the interim sustainability plan was time sensitive, or whether that could be delayed to the next meeting on November 20th.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. It's entirely reasonable to delay it. It should, in theory, be in place when the adoption of the OCP happens, so that that content is not lost. It's essentially, put somewhere until we have a chance to update it. But that could happen anytime between now and December 10th.
And I think the intent would be, if we pass the OCP with this document, it is clearly flagged as an interim, not a final sustainability plan. I think that's also Councillor Skipsey's point, that please don't fret if this isn't the most perfectly written sustainability plan just yet. This is still a work in progress. Okay, just want to make sure, because I did have comments, but the general one is just to look at life cycle greenhouse gas analysis as opposed to operational emissions for certain things. So historically, the town's put out some press releases regarding solar panels with a life cycle GHG analysis relative to boreal hydroelectric power actually pollutes a tiny little bit more over life cycle because of the carbon that's generated from when they're created. The silicon has to be heated to over 1400 degrees Celsius. Anyways, super nerdy, but that is the end of the OCP. So with that, it's now time for, I think, a text message to our Director of Finance. Oh, sorry, Councillor Skipsey, my apologies.
There's a couple of motions here, so I would move that the Town of Qualicum Beach Official Community Plan Bylaw number 918-2025 be introduced and read a first time as amended. Does that?
Yeah, seconded by Councillor Vandervalk. That's entirely appropriate because we had multiple amendments. Any further debate on that motion? Please no. Okay, all those in favor? Passes unanimously.
And then I would move that the zoning bylaw number 900-2018 Amendment Development Permit Area Guidelines, bylaw number 900.08-2025 be introduced and read a first time as amended.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Young. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. And finally,
I would defer this, so I don't know if we need a motion to defer. I would move that it be deferred to the November 20th meeting.
okay. I would point out to your point, so it can be seconded by someone? Motion to defer? Okay. It is just a recommendation to receive it, though, to be fair. But still like to defer it? That's fine. Any debate on the deferral? Seeing none, all those in favor? Defer to the next meeting. And then we can go on to bylaws and look at the perfect timing. Well-oiled machine, despite my best efforts. So we're moving on to bylaws, and it's the 2026 to 2028 sewer parcel tax. Mr. Hare, I believe you might want to present on this.
Thank you, Your Worship, or Chair.
Chair is probably better.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have the sewer parcel tax bylaw in front of council for third reading. And there was a staff report that was reviewed at the October 24th council meeting. The parcel taxes for sewer, the current parcel tax bylaw is valid until the end of this year. So the parcel tax bylaw is set to essentially increase contributions to the sewer infrastructure reserve. And the water parcel tax, there's two bylaws in the water utility area as well. And there's a water rates bylaw and a water parcel tax bylaw. And again, modest increases in those areas. Both bylaws, well, the water rates bylaw stays in effect into perpetuity, but the water rates haven't been adjusted in a number of years and need to be adjusted to recover costs of the water utility, and the parcel tax bylaw is designed for contributions to the infrastructure reserve in the water utility. And I'd be happy to answer any further questions council may have. before third reading.
Okay. And with that, are there any questions to Mr. Hare? Seeing none, would someone like to move the staff recommendation for 4A? Councillor Vandervalk, Councillor Skipsey, all those in favor? That passes. And sorry, just to reiterate, for the benefit of the public, because there is not a long report here, there was a report in a previous council meeting. Those are available online if you're curious. If someone would like to move 4B, 1 and 2, Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vandervalk, all those in favor? Motion passes. Thank you very much. And with that is a motion to adjourn. Councillor Vandervalk, Councillor Skipsey, all those in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. And great job, staff. I really appreciate your hard work. This was a lot of questions with a lot of memory. And for the benefit of the public, the Wayback Machine is an internet website that archives previous iterations of web pages. So that's what we were referring to throughout. Thanks so much.